Good evening, everybody. So, like I said, I represent Dave Wilson Nursery. We are the largest grower of fruit and nut trees in the United States. We produce, this year we produced just under 13.5 million trees. And next year it looks like probably closer to 14 million. So the market's good. You know, farmers are planting trees. Everybody wants fresh produce. Almonds and walnuts and peaches and things like that are just as popular as ever, not only for commercial growers, but for backyard growers as well. So what I like to do is talk about what you do in your backyard. I don't really care what a commercial farmer does. I'm not a commercial farmer. I don't want my backyard to look like a commercial orchard, and I don't have the same expectations that a commercial farmer has. So I incorporate a lot of different styles into what I do as opposed to what a farmer would incorporate. I guess probably the most important one would be tree spacing. If I was a commercial grower of peaches up in the San Joaquin Valley, I would have somewhere between a 14 and 16 foot roadways, and I would have my trees spaced at somewhere between 12 and 16 feet apart in the rows. So I'm going to put in about 120 to 180 trees per acre, and I'm going to do or look for crops that come ripe at one time. So what do you think all that space is for? Trucks, tractors, people. If I'm a commercial grower, I have a lot of work to do on a big scale. I can't bring my wheelbarrow or my little red wagon in and expect to harvest 50 acres of late Legrand nectarines or Hass avocados or Washington navel oranges or anything like that. I got to bring in people, I got to bring in equipment. My number one most important consideration is to get that work done in a timely manner so I can get that fruit sent to a packer, get it graded, get it washed, get it cold stored, get it sent to market, and get my check. It's what I do for a living. So I'm looking for a lot of fruit at one time. So you guys, as backyard growers, should be looking for a little bit of fruit all the time. You don't have need for a commercial expectation of peaches or plums or apricots. So a commercial grower is looking to harvest between 250 and 350 pounds of fruit per tree. So does anybody here, have they ever had need for 200 pounds of plums all at one time? I don't think I need to go into detail and tell you what happens if you eat too many plums too rapidly, but you'll probably only do it once. So when I first planted my very first fruit trees, it was back in the late 1970s when my wife and I first got married, and we just bought a new house, and we were looking for redoing the landscape and making it look nice for us. And my grandfather happened to have this big, giant Santa Rosa plum tree. You guys know Santa Rosa plum? Yeah. Old Luther Burbank interspecific hybrid. It's actually not a plum at all. Most people don't realize it's a plum cod. It has probably a 15 to 20% apricot parentage in it. So it was one of the very first interspecifics to be introduced. And Luther Burbank was really proud of that variety. It's probably the most popular thing next to Burbank russet potatoes that he ever introduced. So Santa Rosa plum's still one of the most popular varieties in the world. It's a great piece of fruit. It's ripe in early July. It's a heavy producer. It's low chill adaptable, but a high chill winter as well. It's a good pollinator for other Japanese plum and pluot varieties. So it has a lot of attributes. So my grandfather's tree at that time was about 20 feet tall and probably about 12 feet wide. And in early July, it just produced plums like bombs coming down out of a plane. It had a great crop every year, and we would always try and make use of that fruit. I mean, I would bag it up and take it to work, and the kids would take it to school, and pretty soon the neighbors don't answer the door anymore. So you can only really use so many Santa Rosa plums. So what if we were to take that same amount of space, say a commercial footprint of 150, 175, maybe even 200 square foot, and instead of just putting in that one Santa Rosa plum, we put in a beauty plum that ripens up in June, and a Santa Rosa that's early to mid-July, and a burgundy that's late July and into August. and a flavor grenade pluot that ripens up late August and into September. So same footprint, same square footage, but now 4 successive ripening varieties on that same space. So instead of 2 weeks worth of Santa Rosa plums, I now have 2 months worth of successive ripening plums. Doesn't that make more sense? That's backyard orchard culture. Number one, most important concept is successive ripening varieties, so you have a little bit of fruit all the time instead of a lot of fruit at any one given time. Now I got to go back to that Santa Rosa one more time and say my grandfather's tree was 20 feet tall. So everything above 8 feet virtually went to waste. Nobody's climbing ladders, nobody's getting up there to thin that fruit. The birds are all getting, most of that high fruit, and when it gets ripe, it comes down quickly, and we were scraping them up off the ground with shovels because there's just too many. You just can't use that amount of fruit in an average year. So if I were to say that the next most important concept of backyard orchard culture is to control tree size so it's manageable for you. So instead of that 20-foot tree or 15-foot tree or 12-foot tree, I can keep all my plum trees at about 7.5 or 8 feet. So now I can go out and do all my work from the ground. If I need to prune, if I need to thin, if I need to harvest, everything's right there in front of me. I can go out and do that work in 5 minutes without dragging out ladders or pole pruners or any big equipment that I really don't want to have to drag out into my yard to begin with. So successive ripening varieties, a little bit of fruit all the time. Control tree size so it's manageable for you. I'm not going to tell you what size that tree should be because that's not my decision. It's the grower's decision. It's your decision. You should be the one that determines what's manageable for you. And if you honestly feel that 15 feet or 20 feet is a manageable size for you, I'm not opposed to that. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't do that. But what I will tell you is that it's easier to manage a small tree than it is to manage a big tree. So take that into consideration and choose the size that works for you. Make sure you're managing your trees properly so that you get an adequate fruit set, but you still have the ability to go out and do your job in a short period of time. And for me, a plum and a peach and an apricot are completely different than an avocado or a navel orange or a Eureka lemon because they're two different characters there. Plums and apricots, prunus in general, ripen up over a very short period, where my Hass avocados hold for 8 months. My Washington navel oranges hold for 5 or 6 months. My Eureka lemons produce fruit on a year-round basis. But those will hold for so long on the tree, it's really easy for me to go out every Sunday morning with a 10-foot pole and a basket picker and grab 15 avocados and grab a few oranges and a few lemons, and I've got a week or 10 days worth of fruit that I can use. So that 15-foot avocado tree is just as manageable as an 8-foot plum tree. I don't want to have to go out and have to manage a plum that way because I'd be doing it all the time and I'd have way too much fruit, a lot more than I could use in a 2 or 3 week period of time. Now, avocados, that's a different story. Every time my daughter comes over, she's got the Trader Joe's bag and she walks right out the back door and up to the avocado tree before she even says hello. Every time the neighbors are looking over the fence, it's like, oh, those fuertes, yeah, they're looking really good over there. Aren't those about ripe now? So, it's not just me that eats avocados, and I eat an avocado every day. So by having, again, my successive ripening combination, and by having trees that are managed at 12 to 15 feet, I have the ability to harvest an avocado, eat an avocado every day. And my wife does the same thing, and it seems like a lot of the people that I know like to do the same thing out of my backyard. So it's and I can give them plums all day long, but they don't want plums, they want the avocados. So an avocado is a coveted piece of fruit. If you give somebody an avocado as a gift, it's like, that's special, that means something. Plums are like, oh God, what am I going to do with these? So, choose your fruits wisely. Make sure that you're also putting in varieties that you're going to know and you're going to use. That's probably the third most important concept of backyard orchard culture. Grow what you like and what you'll use. I don't want to see you guys planting something and then deciding 5 years later that it doesn't work for you. And I actually had a great telephone call about 10 years ago from a guy, and it's probably early October, and I answer the phone in the morning, and the guy just says to me in a discouraged kind of a voice, "What do you do with quince?" And I thought, well, when I was a kid, I used to throw them at cats on my grandmother's back fence. And he says, yeah, you know, my wife's a cat lover. I don't think I can do that. And he goes, let me explain myself. He goes, about 5 years ago, it was the end of the bare root season, and I went down to the Kmart, and they had all their little leftover trees in bags, and they were all on sale for $5. I said, hey, that's a great price. You know, you can't grow a tree for $5. And he said, yeah, but you know, all they had left were quince, so I bought 5 of them. So, you know, minimal financial investment of $25. But now, consider 5 years worth of your garden space, 5 years worth of irrigation, 5 years worth of fertilization, 5 years worth of manicuring, pruning, and growing those trees up to be healthy and productive and grow this beautiful crop of quince and have no idea what to do with it. So, you know, he said, I went out to the tree and I picked the biggest, most beautiful fruit and I took a bite out of it and I threw it down on the ground. I said, well, quince is a processing fruit, you know, they make jams and jellies, and my grandmother used to make these fantastic quince tarts, and you know, he goes, yeah, that's not what I want. I just wanted some stuff I could eat out of my backyard. So he didn't do his homework. He didn't pay attention. He didn't even know what he was planting. He didn't even know what a quince was. But he thought it was a good idea to plant 5 of them because they were cheap. So do your due diligence. Make sure that you understand what you're putting in, and not only the varieties. You know, I mean, you want to do your homework on varieties. You want to make sure that you have varieties that are adaptable to your growing conditions. But you also want to make sure that those varieties are grafted onto a rootstock that is adaptable to your climate and your soil. You know, we grow Santa Rosa plum on 6 different rootstocks, and the reason that we do that is because we sell some in Tucson, Arizona, and we sell some in Boise, Idaho, and we sell some in Denver, Colorado, and we sell some in Riverside, and we sell some in Sacramento, and some coastal, some inland, some mountain, some desert, all kinds of different climates. So each one of those 6 rootstocks has a geographically adaptable attribute. Some, like St. Julian, I can sell in Boise, Idaho, they'll take 40 below zero. And some, like Nemagard, I can sell in Yuma, Arizona, because they take the hot summer sun, they take the sandy alkaline soil. So different rootstocks for different areas. So selecting a tree and making sure that it's on the right rootstock is every bit as important as the cultivar itself. All of those trees are 2 components. I saw one of your questions was on apple rootstock. So you guys understand the rootstock to scion or the rootstock to bud combination, that all those trees are 2 components. But how many times have you walked into a nursery and had somebody explain to you the importance of paying attention to the rootstock as well as the cultivar? Anybody? You? 0? Okay. Now, if you go into some of the local nurseries, you know, if you go to Sunshine, or if you go to Beaumont Garden Center, or you go to one of the Park Views, or you go down to Louis, they get it. They understand it. They know the area. They know what rootstocks do well. We work together. I work with them on their orders. But if you deal with, some of the nurseries are actually a kind of a side business of another business. And some of those businesses kind of model their facilities, let's say like a big box. I won't name any names. I don't think I need to do that. But oftentimes you go into one of these big boxes and they've got trees $2 cheaper than Louis. But they don't tell you what rootstock they're on. They don't really know. It's like, you can say, well, okay, you got a Santa Rosa plum there. You know what rootstock that's on? And they're like, I just came out of the paint department. You know, I'm not sure what you're even talking about. So it absolutely pays to buy from a reputable source that understands your climate, understands your geographics, understands what, you know, your growing conditions are. And you can get that information by going to our website, davewilson.com. All that information is posted along with variety descriptions of basically everything that we grow. So we want that to be easily accessible information for you so that you can make the right decision. So if you look at the harvest date chart and pick a variety for June and a variety for July and a variety for August and one for September and so on and so on and so on, you can have the successive ripening. You look at the rootstock descriptions and you can pick the rootstocks that are adaptable to your climate and your soil. Then you're going to be successful. You're going to win. You're going to have a tree that's going to last for years and like the climate that it's growing in, and it's going to be productive and do well for you. So make sure that you're paying attention to those attributes, not only the tree, but the rootstock itself. Make sure they're varieties you like to eat. Make sure they're varieties that are adaptable. Make sure you're choosing successive ripening varieties to fill your season. So those are the three main points of backyard orchard culture. Grow what you like and what you'll use. Make sure to control tree size so it's manageable for you. Make sure to grow successive ripening varieties so you have a little bit of fruit all the time instead of a lot of fruit at any one given time. You do those three things. If you just walked out of the room right now you followed those three concepts, you'd be a better backyard grower from this point on. So I've got a few other things that I might add to that that would help to make you more successful. So any questions on those 3 points before we move on? Yes?
About 10 years ago, I went to a gardening lecture about this topic about successive planting, and the person suggested planting 4 different trees of the same fruit that would ripen at different times.
Absolutely.
So is there a trick? Because I did that, except I knew that 2 trees, and with the exception of one, I kind of didn't pay attention to them. One became way more dominant.
Yes, and here's the trick. Pay attention to them. Here's the deal. Here's the deal. One variety, if it's a multiple grafted tree with 3 or 4 or 5 varieties on it, or a multiple planted combination, even though they're on the same rootstock, you could have planted 4 plums all on myrobalan rootstock. But you know, they're all individual growing units, and they're all going to want to grow differently. So one variety is always going to want to dominate that combination. You can't let that happen. You have to make sure that you're much more aggressively pruning that strong variety and allowing the weaker varieties to catch up. You also want to pay attention to it when you're choosing your planting style. If I'm going to put 4 varieties in, and one of them is a 1/2 inch caliper, and 2 of them are 5/8 and one of them is 3/4, then I'm going to take that bigger aggressive tree, and that's going to get the northeast combination. That's going to get the northeast spot. So that way it doesn't shade out the smaller tree that I can plant on the southwest side, and that southwest tree is going to get an equal opportunity to catch up. So you definitely want to make sure that you're controlling vigor and that you're giving the smaller tree the optimum spacing, the optimum face, you know, so that it can grow as aggressive, or you know, grow as aggressively as the most aggressive variety that you have. So management absolutely comes into play in a situation like that. And that's the mistake that everybody makes with that if they don't understand it. And we would have gone into that subject in the near future here and discussed it in the same detail that we just did, but since you brought it up, we got it covered. Thank you. Anything else before we move on? That's it? Really? Yeah.
Okay, avocados.
Avocados.
I have an avocado developed by UCR. Anyway, it takes forever to ripen, and I've only had one really good avocado up here. Sometimes it doesn't do well. It's not real soft. Because I know they don't ripen on the tree, so you pay them. And I've tried everything. Put it in the bag with the banana, put it in the bag with something else.
So do they kind of shrivel instead of ripen?
No, they don't shrivel, but they're not ripening. Sometimes I think, well, you know, I waited 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to try it anyway. I cut into it and throw it away, or put it in my.
So I think probably what you want to make sure of, and what a lot of people don't understand is Guatemalan avocados, which almost all the varieties grown in California are of Guatemalan origin. There's a few Mexican varieties, but the Mexican varieties are few and far in between. So
It looked like the one that was perfect, and it was
it looked like a Hass. Well, see, UC Riverside, everything that they hybridize has Hass in the combination. Hass is the leading market variety, so they're looking for Hass with a different season, Hass with a larger size. They're looking for different cultivars around the Hass variety to try and improve it. Unfortunately, so far they really, in my opinion, they haven't been able to improve it, but they have extended the season and they have come up with some bigger fruit, but I don't know that they've come up with anything that the industry says is a better fruit. So Hass is still the predominant, you know, variety in the avocado market and the predominant backyard variety, and has such a great hang time and such a good flavor. You know, it's just one of those that almost can't be beat. Well, here's what you want to look at. Guatemalan varieties typically take between 14 and 18 months to ripen. So when it's a tree that's blooming right now, a Hass is going to bloom right now, and it's going to set that small fruit, and you're going to go all the way into summer, fall of 2019 before that fruit is ripe that's blooming now. So most people pick avocados too early. Most people pick them too early. That's the big mistake that a lot of people make. In fact, I had a good friend that is a real, fruit tree fanatic. And about 2 years ago, he says to me, well, I got to go home and pick all my Fuerte fruit today. And I'm like, really? Why are you going to do that? And he goes, well, the tree's getting ready to bloom. I said, yeah. He said, well, I got to get that fruit off before the tree blooms. So I said, so you're going to pick it before it's ripe just to get it off before the tree blooms? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you do that? Well, you have to do that. No, you don't have to do that. You can have 2 crops on the tree at one time, and that's what you want to do. You want to, you only pick what you're going to use. Don't go home and pick 100 avocados because the tree's going to bloom again. You want to make sure that you're allowing those enough time to ripen up fully. And like I said, most varieties are going to take between 14 and 18 months to fully ripen. So, what you can do, go to the website for Laverne Nursery, lavernenursery.com, and look at their avocado harvest date chart on there. And then you can kind of see when varieties are going to ripen up. And what you want to do is you want to go out and say, okay, they've been on the tree for 14 months. They're supposed to be ripe right now. But you don't go out and pick 30. You go out and pick 2 or 3 of the most beautiful fruit, and then you kitchen counter them and you see how long it takes them to ripen up and soften up. And if they're good, you go pick more. If they're not, you wait. So just, don't get impatient, You want to make sure that you... I understand. I was looking at my holiday tree last weekend. There's holiday fruit that literally this big on that tree, but they won't be ripe till October. So, they're going to sit there for another 6 months before they're harvestable. Anything else? You had a question, or?
I was just going to comment, I appreciate the DaveWilson.com videos because they definitely helped us plan the seasonal varieties.
Oh, good.
When you walk into a store, you just see peaches. You don't see the different varieties of peaches. And it definitely stopped us from getting a big flurry of fruit of
Yeah.
all one thing.
Yeah, excellent, good. Well, that's what the website is meant to do. It's just meant to answer some of the common questions and, let people feel comfortable with it and let you know that there's more options than, 1 or 2 things that the chain stores want to push. Yes? The nursery is 35 miles east of Modesto, California in the Sierra Mountain foothills. We ship all over the world, but we're wholesale only. So unless you're buying 250 trees, I can't help you. But all those retailers that I mentioned earlier, they can. And they all sell our material. So I want you guys to deal with the local retailers and support them. They're the ones that retail our material. We just wholesale to commercial growers, retail and wholesale nurseries, farmers, people like that.
So is your name on the containers?
Our name is on every single label that we put out. So yeah, every one of our trees has a big, beautiful leaf Dave Wilson Nursery logo on it. Yes, absolutely. If you go to the home garden section, which is where you want to go, and then go to retail source list or where to buy our trees, then you can pull up a list by state, by county. You can you can put in Santa Rosa plum, and a list of everybody that sells Santa Rosa plum will come up. So we make it real easy to navigate. Okay, so let's move on. Let's go to the next step. Let's talk about another thing that I've never heard a retailer mention the importance of this. Understanding your individual microclimate. We all have our own microclimate. We all have our own piece of property, and my property is going to be different than your property. Your property is going to be different than your cousin's property or your neighbor's property or the guy that's 1.5 miles down the road. Everybody's property is different. You want to understand your property. So USDA and Sunset have done a great job of giving us what they call a zone map. And honestly, to me, zone map is worthless. They're so much geographic area within each individual zone. And all of those are different depending on your soil type, your exposure, your irrigation, your water quality. There's so many variables in every single zone that I don't want you to tell me that you're in zone 10 or zone 9 or sunset zone 22. I want to know what happens on your individual piece of property, and that's what you need to understand. So you want to know, where's my hot spots and my cold spots? Where do I get sun all the time? Where do I get partial shade? Where do I get full shade? Where do I get sun in the summertime and shade in the wintertime? You know, sun's up here in July, but it's way down here in November. So you're going to get different exposures at different times of the year. You want to look at your landscape at different times of the year and figure out, what do those exposures give me? What do they lend? What attributes do they have that I can use to my advantage, not only for growing fruit trees, but for growing anything, whether it's gladiolas or roses or tomatoes or staghorn ferns, whatever you want to grow, you want to put them in the right area. So understanding everything about your exposures, understanding, you know, where do I get a freeze in the winter and where is it frost free? Where's my wind damaging areas? Well, the Santa Anas come in from the northeast, so you want to make sure that you have some wind shelter. You want to make sure that you're not planting a banana in an area where it's going to get shredded by the Santa Ana winds. You want to understand where you're going to get a little bit of chill in the wintertime and where it's going to stay warm, so I can grow my Asian pear tree where it gets some winter chill, but my mango tree where I can grow it in a frost-free area. And you probably have all of those different microclimates on your piece of property. It's just understanding where they are and when you get the different types of exposure. You got to understand your soil type. How does my soil drain? Well, everybody says, yeah, you know, my soil's okay. But I pretty much guarantee you that your property right now doesn't look like it did before the developer came in. There was probably hills and valleys. There could have been stream beds. There's probably areas where they took a hillside and pushed it into a valley, so you've got fill over here and you've got cut over here. Well, those two soil types are going to react dramatically differently, and you want to know where you have each one. So I'm going to check my soil all around my property. I'm not going to just say, well, you know what, looks pretty sandy, it must be good, must be fast draining, because it might be here, but it might not be over there. So I'm going to dig test holes. I'm going to dig 20 test holes. Make them all the same. Make them all 12 inches wide and 18 inches deep, and then go back and fill them all up with water. Then you want to get your notepad and your pen and walk out there and go, okay, over here, those drained in about 15 minutes. And over here, well, it took about an hour and a half to 2 hours over here. Right over here, there was still water in those holes the next morning. That tells me everything I need to know about my drainage. Great drainage, fair drainage, poor drainage. So now when I want to plant a tree, I'm going to take that into consideration. What type of trees need fast draining soil? What type of trees will take a heavier soil? I'm going to use that to my advantage by putting the right variety in the right place. Maybe all of them drain out in 10 minutes and you've got great drainage, and that's golden. That's beautiful, because that's a rarity. Most people don't have that luxury of having good fast draining soil on their property. Maybe none of them drain well. So then you've got to take a different strategy. Okay, I've got poor drainage all around my property. It's adobe clay. I could make bricks and build a house out of it if I wanted to. So if I'm going to plant a mango or a papaya or an avocado that requires a fast draining soil, and then I know that I have to create a rise. I'm going to grow it on a mound, or I'm going to grow it in a raised bed, so that I can get that top root above my native soil where it can oxygenate, it can breathe, the water can get away from that area, so that that tree is going to succeed. If you take that avocado tree and plant it at grade in heavy soil, it's good for about 6 months. And then you know, everybody says the same thing. I went down to the nursery and I spent $100 on an avocado tree, and they sold me a bad tree. Yes, they sold me a bad tree. I know they did. That guy looked at me. I could tell by the way he looked at me that he was selling me a bad tree. But you know, you go back to the nursery with your dead avocado tree, and you know, they say, well, you know what? I got 50 of them over here, and you know, I sold you one. What did I sell you? The only bad one? The other 50 are looking beautiful. You know. Well, what happened was, you took it home and you put it under conditions that it didn't like. So you know the tree just doesn't do well. But of course, we would never want to admit that we did anything wrong. So it's not our fault. It's the nursery's fault for selling us a bad tree. So, right? Yeah. So that's why some nurseries guarantee everything, and you know, some of them don't. But basically, if you deal with a good, reputable nursery, the stock looks good, the people seem to understand what they're talking about, you're probably going to get a good tree. So make sure you're planting it under the right conditions. It's an investment. A $100 tree is an investment. And if I look at my Hass avocado as an investment and think, okay, 10 years ago I spent $100 on that tree. 2 years it didn't produce any fruit. The third year I got 20, and the fourth year I got 50, and now I get 300 avocados a year off that tree. Well, I can go out there and go $1, $2, $3, $4. So as soon as I got my first 100 avocados, everything else is my payback. Everything else that's my dividends. Every year I get, you know, $300 in dividends from that tree every single year. So it's an investment. I wish all my investments did as well as my Hass avocado tree. So you got to look at it that way. You know, you're going to spend some money. You're going to spend some time. You're going to put some effort into it, some irrigation, some fertilizer, some pruning. You know, you want to make sure you're getting that reward. So taking the time up front to do your homework and make sure that you're putting the tree in the right spot and using the soils to your advantage and using the exposures to your advantage. Those are the things that are going to make you successful. Those are the things that are going to give you the payback on your investment. Any questions on that?
I have a comment. We live on the side of a hill, and it wasn't until it was early evening of walking down the bottom of our property, and I felt a cold chill in one area. And I looked up the hill, and there was a low spot above us where cold air was falling in a river down just this one narrow 30, 40-foot area. So that's where we're planting our apples.
Absolutely. You know, I mean,
And
cold air is heavier than warm air.
And
So
you should go walking around your property in different times of the day because you never know where cold and hot air is moving.
that's a great example of exactly what we're talking about. You know, so all of a sudden, just by walking out there one evening, you know, now I can put an Asian pear or some cherries or apples or whatever in that cold spot that are going to require more chill than up at the top of the hill where I can plant my Hass avocado. So yeah, that's absolutely what we're talking about. So you want to understand your microclimate. You want to make sure you're understanding not only your varieties but your rootstocks. Now let's consider this. Landscape. Like I said earlier when I started, I do not want my backyard to look like a peach orchard in Tulare County. I think that's ridiculous. And I want my backyard to look beautiful. So I'm going to plant a lot of fruit trees in my backyard because I like to eat a lot of fresh fruit and I want that successive ripening attributes there. So I'm going to need more than just a handful of fruit trees. But I also want my backyard to be something that I'm proud of. I want it to look ornamentally appealing. I want to be able to go out and enjoy all those things in my backyard. So I'm using fruiting plants like most people would use an ornamental. You know, I have no problem planting citrus as a hedge. I have no problem espaliering apple trees in an area where I wouldn't ever consider growing a regular tree. I have no problem growing Mexican lime in a hanging basket on my patio where I can reach out the window of the bar and pick a lime for my gin and tonic. So you can do all of those things as long as you're willing to manage it. A tree doesn't have to be a tree. And anybody that tells you that it does, they don't understand it. Because, you know, people have been doing this for centuries. You know, if you were to have grown up in the Middle East 1,000 years ago, you would have had figs as a fence line. You would have grown grapevines over the roof of your house for shade. You would have been using these plants for function. So they can be more than a tree. They can do anything you want as far as function. You know, if I wanted to plant a hedge, say I have a neighbor that doesn't really take very good care of their landscape and they've got an old junky car in the driveway and I've got this 40-foot driveway that goes down to the street. I'm tired of looking at this property. So I go down to Parkview Nursery and I see Tim there and I say, Tim, a 40-foot section, 4 feet wide. I want to grow an 8-foot hedge so I can block out my neighbor's old car in the driveway. Tim's going to take me out and he's going to show me ligustrum, waxleaf privet, photinias, Japanese boxwood, maybe a cypress or a juniper. There's all these different types of plants that you can use as a hedge, and they're all going to do what I want them to do. They're all going to be a hedge. They're all going to give me green, dense structure that can give me a screen. They can easily be kept at 8 feet by 4 feet wide. So all of those things will give me a hedge. So could I use citrus for that? Absolutely. So 40 feet, 10 trees, 4 feet apart. So instead of planting 10 Photinia fraseri, I buy myself 10 assorted citrus. So I get a Valencia and a Navel for winter and summer. I get an Oro Blanco and a Star Ruby for winter and summer grapefruit. I get a Satsuma mandarin and a Tango and a Gold Nugget. So I've got 9 months worth of successive ripening mandarins. I throw in a Mineola Tangelo. I put in a Meyer lemon. I put in a Bear seedless lime. So now in a place where I really only wanted to grow a hedge, I've got 10 varieties of fruit. Isn't that great? So I'm not going to get 600 lemons off my Eureka lemon in a hedge, but I'm probably going to get 50 to 100 a year, and that's probably a usable amount for most people. So now I have a plant where if we looked at the attributes of citrus over and above the fruit, it would still be a valuable Mediterranean-style landscape plant. It's hardy. It's got a beautiful dark green, dense foliage. It has blooms in the springtime that are either white or light pink. Heck, Eureka lemon and Meyer lemon bloom for 6 or 7 or 8 months out of the year. Fragrance, beautiful fragrance on the blooms. So where I only wanted a hedge, now I have that structure. I can sculpt it. I can take advantage of the flowers, and I've got 10 varieties of fruit. So that's using things like that to your advantage, you know. And you know, the neighbor from, I've seen it 1,000 times, the neighbor from down the street comes walking down there and goes, too close together. Can't plant those that close. Those are trees. You can't grow trees that close. Thank you for your opinion and your time, and you know, continue on your walk, please. So you know, everybody has their own opinion, and everybody's going to get. They all want to give you their opinion. They're all experts, so they're all going to tell you about. You know, I used to have a Valencia orange, and it was 30 feet tall, and it had 2,000 fruit every year. You can't do this, but yes, you can. You absolutely can. So you can use fruit trees to your advantage in any way, any form, any structure, as long as you're willing to manage that. You want to plant a hedge, you want to plant them in just a row, you want to do a staggered planting, you want to grow them in a raised bed, whatever you want to do, you can accomplish that, and you can use that to your advantage. If I start looking at some of the flowers and the foliage colors and the structures that I can get out of fruit trees, it's incredible. My Fuyu persimmon has beautiful dark orange fall color for 6 weeks out of the year. I go back to New England and they say, hey, it's fall. We got fall color for 2 weeks. I got fall color for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. And that's in Southern California. It's not in a climate like that. If I look at the flowers on my Red Baron peach and my Saturn peach and my all-in-one almond and some of those varieties that have those big double flower characters, they're absolutely spectacular. So if I wanted to grow, an Asian pear as an espalier, I can easily do that. I can use trees for any function I want. So now I look at the other attributes, which would be, structure, sizes, shapes, what can I do with it, what colors do I get, what flowers do I get a fragrance out of it? There's all kinds of other attributes that a fruit tree are going to give you besides just fruit. So you want to consider all of those. They're all important. And remember, you're not a farmer. So you're not looking for maximum yield, and you're not looking to grow trees in a north-south row at 16 feet apart like an almond grower would do in Tulare County. I don't care what an almond grower does in Tulare County. I care what you do in your backyard in Riverside. So use those things to your advantage. Any questions? Yes.
You know the thing about the hedge of like citrus?
Mm-hmm.
I always wonder about, do people pick your fruit off your, if you had fruit trees in the front yard, would people like walk?
I think they would, yeah. Absolutely. In fact, I have a rental house in Ontario that has a citrus hedge in the front yard that I planted when I lived there in 1981. And I feed the whole neighborhood with lemons and limes and navel oranges and blood oranges and Algerian mandarins and kumquats and you name it.
I have that neighbor with the car and the utility.
Yeah.
And I just have a cleared area, and I'm looking at this diagram, and I'm thinking, maybe I'll plant some trees.
Why not? still, even with neighbors picking the fruit on those trees, there's still a lot of fruit on those trees. And, sometimes maybe,
They won't pick any because they happen to have a citrus in their front yard, and they never pick one of the things off of it.
yeah, so you should glean off of that too. Let's go knock on the door,
We did
So-
that, and our neighbors cleaned up their yard. And I have them preserved, and I would send stuff over there, and they would start sending me fruit back from their neglected trees. And it got a little better.
Yeah, little give and take, that's always good. So any other questions on that? Yeah? Oh, it was like 30 inches. Yeah, it was probably that big around. Yeah, dwarf Mexican lime. Was in there for years. Oh, no, I don't water anything every day. It probably got watered in the summertime 2 to 3 times a week, in the wintertime once every 2 weeks. Different times of the year, different water usage. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. So any other questions on tree style or, yeah?
Okay, I see your configuration in a straight line, and then that's like all you have, is like a straight line.
What are you looking at? Oh, that diagram, okay. So those are just different examples of different styles of planting. None of those are set in concrete. You can take any of those and use them to your advantage in any way that works for you, but it's just represented there, a 2-in-1, a 3-in-1, a 4-in-1, a hedgerow, a staggered planting, a spell year. It's just different methodology to make good use of your space.
So my question is, if you have to plant, if you just have a strip in a straight line, and you're using actual fruit trees, not trying to espalier or bush or
Mm-hmm.
hedge, when you're planting them that close, does the foliage of this tree touch the foliage of that tree?
Oh, it certainly will, unless you keep them pruned individually constantly. They'll grow into each other. It's okay with me.
When I cut them off like they do when trucks go by and you see the tree that has.
Oh yeah, the Edison style pruning, yeah. Very familiar with that, yeah. So no, I mean, in any orchard situation, trees are going to grow together. They're not going to have an individual cut in between trees. So, but if you want to do that, you can certainly do that. If I wanted to grow a 4-in-1 of peaches, I know that I'm going to give each one of those trees 25% of that combination. So if one of them's growing into the other one and it's taking up more than its 25% of the space, I'm cutting it out. Just keeping it managed to not allow anything to take up any more than its allocated amount of space. Okay, anything else before we move on?
Sorry, just one.
Yeah.
So I moved Valencia and a not as huge navel, and you don't know where one starts and the other one ends.
Mm-hmm.
But I've noticed that the navel has started having seeds in it. Just, the navel will have like one seed. So is there cross-pollination between?
Probably, yeah. And Valencia is a powerhouse as far as a pollinator. All the guys that wanted heavy crops of mandarins would always throw a Valencia orange in there about every 20th tree. They don't do that anymore because now they want seedless mandarins. So the Valencia orange is out. In fact, they put a net over the trees so that they won't even be affected by bee pollination, so that they can keep them seedless. Those cuties guys or the halos guys, they don't want any seeds in that fruit. So it's much more important to grow small fruit with no seeds than big fruit with seeds. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about container culture. How many people are growing anything fruiting in containers? Yeah, quite a few of you. And I think that's an important attribute to landscaping in Southern California. I have a lot of trees in containers. In fact, at any given time, I probably have 50 trees in containers. So I'm constantly trying out new varieties. So I'm bringing in new things every year. And before I dedicate some ground space to it, I'm going to grow it for a year or 2 years in a container and see how it does for me. Some things actually do better in containers than in the ground. Blueberries are a great example of that. To grow blueberries in the ground in Riverside, yeah, it's almost impossible. But to grow them in a half barrel or to grow them in a raised bed with a nice acidic, fast draining soil, that's success, boy. That's giving you some blueberries, and that's where it's making it all worthwhile. The two things that they absolutely require are fast draining soil and an acidic mix. So it's hard to do that in the ground, but it can easily be done in a raised bed or in a container. Also, gophers love blueberries, so in a raised bed with a screen on the bottom or in a half barrel, you can keep the gophers out of your blueberries too. So container culture is always important for me. I think what you want to consider is choosing as large a container as you can. Is there anything to mark on here with? In a cup on the podium. Sometimes. There we go. So this isn't the permanent one that they won't be able to wash off, is it? No, that's what it is. So I travel around and see all kinds of retail nursery customers. I have traveled all around the world and looked at nurseries. And pottery right now, that high fire, high glaze, different colors, big pottery, it's all the rage right now. People are spending big money on things like that. And one thing I see a lot is this great big, like an Italian-style Roman urn. You know, it looks like it's 500 years old, and they drug it off the bottom of the ocean, and they're just absolutely beautiful. So if I spend $200 on this pot, and I plant my blueberry in there, and I decide 3 years down the road that I want to transplant my blueberry into a raised bed, what do I have to do to transplant my blueberry? To save my $9 blueberry, I gotta break a $200 pot. So if you're using container culture, make sure that you're taking this into consideration. Tapered sides. It doesn't have to be much, but if you look at every single nursery container, the base is narrower than the lip. So that way, if I'm growing a tree in this container and I decide that I want to take it out, all I got to do is lay it over and roll it a couple of times. I can pop the tree right out. So I can transplant 1s into 5s and 5s into 15s and 15s into barrels or boxes or whatever I want to do. And my container of choice is the half wine barrels. I love those. I absolutely love those. They're all oak and they're burned on the inside, and you can put as many drainage holes in the bottom as you want, and they're going to last about 6 or 7 years. And at that point, they basically fall apart. The wood rots away. You can just knock the galvanized barrel rings down and throw them in the recycle, and throw the old barrel stays in the fire pit and get rid of it. And then you have that plant that was in that barrel, and I can transplant it into another barrel or something else or move it out. So the consideration for something like this, if I want to get a year out of a plant, then a 5-gallon nursery container is fine. And I can grow in this 5-gallon nursery pot, I can grow a 6 or 7 foot tree, because there's a longevity consideration there. And the longevity here is 1 year. I can grow that big tree in a small pot for 1 year. After that, I should be transplanting it out into something else and giving it more space. So when you go to the nursery and you see big tree in a small pot, it's meant to be purchased, taken home, planted out. So if I want longevity, if I want to get my 5 or 6 or 7 years out of a half barrel or any other container, then I always want to take into consideration overall plant size in relationship to the root zone that I'm giving it to grow in. So I'm going to take my Meyer lemon in a half barrel, or my papaya, or not papaya, but mango or whatever I'm growing in my half barrel, and I'm going to be keeping it structurally pruned so that the top is in balance with the root. That's going to give you longevity. That eliminates the physical stress that this plant could have, because this plant's going to be in a retail nursery. It's going to be maintained all the time. They can water it every day or every other day if they have to. But the minute you walk away from this tree on a 4th of July weekend and go away for 3 days, when you come back, that's a crispy critter. It's basically gone. It'll sunburn, it'll defoliate, and then to try and bring back that investment, that's tough. So the balance between top and root will give you that longevity. It'll give you the ability to maintain that plant in that container for pretty much as long as that type of a container will last. Now, I'm still going to, every few years when that barrel rots away, I'm still going to take that plant out of that old barrel and I'm going to prune it back a little more aggressively, and I'm probably going to take a slice off the bottom of the root system and maybe even a little bit off the sides, and I'm going to set a new barrel down and drill some holes in it and put some soil in it and replant it back into that barrel, and I'm good for another few years. I have a Nagami kumquat that I have had since 1978, and it's in its 7th half barrel, and I still maintain it at about the size of the barrel, and every time the barrel rots away, I put a new. It's got a trunk on it about that big around. Looks like a beautiful little bonsai, It's just been sculptured and structured for 30 some years.
Do you trim the roots then during the winter?
In the wintertime, yeah, you can safely do that in December or January.
Because our peach tree, I know I neglected to do that last winter because it's at the size where I know it's root bound or pot bound, right?
Mhm.
So I need to trim it, but I didn't.
Yeah, so you don't want to do that now. You want to do that, in December or January. But start, considering sculpting that size so that it matches the container that it's in. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm making
So
about 6 feet.
for container culture, that's the most important consideration. We'll talk a little bit more about fertilizing as we go on. You're going to feed a container more than you would trees in the ground because naturally the elements are going to leach much more quickly than they would in the ground. So where I have a 6-month on, 6-month off philosophy for ground feeding, I have a 9 or 10 month and 2 or 3 months off philosophy for container culture. So it's a little bit different. Yes?
As I age, I can't lift as much anymore to repot. Do you have any secrets, tricks that you know of that you can put in the container before you put the plant in it to help you lift it up? So when you have to be
They have grow bags that you could actually have grow bags that are about the same size as a barrel. You could actually put that grow bag in there, or in a 15-gallon can or whatever. They make them to conform to the sizes of nursery containers because a lot of guys will grow trees in those bags in the ground, and then they can come in with a backhoe and just hook onto the 2 handles and just pop it right out of the ground. So that would be a consideration.
rot away by the time.
They're a pretty tough fiber product, and they last for several years. So a lot of the growers in Arizona do that because above ground growing, it's so hot, or the Coachella Valley, it's so hot that it just burns the roots every summer. But if that root is down below grade, then they stay as cool as the soil down there does. So that's a big growing technique in the deserts right now. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Go ahead.
Say for prunus, is there a size you can get to where it becomes much more difficult to say transplant, dig it out and move it off the line? Or can you
Oh, absolutely. Have you ever tried to dig out a 6-year-old peach tree? That's some work, man. At that point, I'm getting out the chainsaw and buying a new tree. It's not worth it. You can grow a 2-year tree into that form again in a couple more years, but to put that amount of labor and effort into digging out a tree that could already have some issues, and it's a major deal.
Okay, and then upon planting, do you always recommend pruning at planting or
Yes,
prunus?
absolutely. Prune at planting time, and anytime you're moving a tree, you should be. If I'm going to dig out a peach tree, when I dig out that peach tree, I'm going to look at the amount of root that I was able to extract from the ground, and I'm going to prune the top structure back in balance with that root. So you don't want an 8-foot wide peach tree and a 2-foot wide root system. You want a 2-foot wide top at that point. So and there again, how much root are you really going to be able to get out and move? A 4x4x4 root ball weighs about 2,000 pounds. So that's a lot of work. So at that point, I'm going down and buying a new tree. Okay, let's talk about some of my favorite subjects: mulching, irrigation, fertilization, and pest control. What time do you guys want to take a break? About 8 o'clock?
Yeah, between 7:30 and 8.
Okay, perfect. So raise your hand if you're a mulcher. Oh, good, most of you. Most all of you. That's great. That's great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you what I consider to be the 4 main attributes of a healthy mulching program. And then all you people that are not mulchers, I'll give you an opportunity to rebut. So first of all, we've done many studies over the years on mulching. I've done 2 studies with UC Riverside. I've done studies with Cal Poly Pomona, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, UC Davis, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I've done lots of different mulching studies. So what we've found over the years is that 2 inches is good, 4 inches is better. So an optimum layer of mulch should be about 4 inches. I know people that have gone 6, 8, 10, 12, and that's fine. It all works. 4 is probably the minimal amount that you want to go with when you're mulching. So what mulching does for you are these 4 different things. Number 1, it keeps your summertime ground temperatures cooler by 15 to 20 degrees. That's pretty big. That's a big deal, especially here in Riverside or out in Beaumont or out in the lower deserts. Even in the Orange County inland valleys and the San Gabriel Valley, the soil gets pretty hot in the summertime. And if you have unmulched bare soil, it's not uncommon for that soil to get into the 90s or even over 100 degrees for the first couple of inches at the surface. So that does a lot of damage. That can damage the root systems of a lot of plants and trees. And we know for a fact that no matter what your soil's like, those trees are all going to be taking up most of their nutrients and carbohydrates from the first 4 to 6 inches of soil on the top. So being able to keep that cooler by 15 to 20 degrees takes all the physical stress off that root system during the most stressful time of the year. That's huge. If mulch only did that, if that was the only attribute of mulching, I would still be in. I would still be doing it. So let's talk about the second attribute of mulching. A 2 to 4 to 6 inch layer of mulch will make better use of your irrigation water by 50%. Proven fact, 50%. Every study has proven that. So if my landscape is half lawn and half hardscape, and then half, planting areas with trees and shrubs and tomatoes and my wife's rose garden and my Japanese maple collection and my palm collection and so on and so on and so on. And I'm mulching that 50% of my landscape, and my water bill is $100 a month. And I can say that that's probably about $50 indoor, $50 outdoor. Well, now, just by mulching that 50% of my landscape, I can save $12.50, $15 a month. I mean, doesn't sound like a big deal, but it'll buy you 10 yards of mulch, every year in bulk if that's what you're doing. So it not only will pay for your mulch layer, but it's a stressed resource that right now in California, unless we make some dramatic changes in the way we save water and store water and deliver water, we're not going to have any more water than what we have right now. Never. This is as much. All of our reservoirs are full. We had another below average rainfall and snowpack year, but down by at least 60%. Up in the High Sierra, probably down by 40%. So we're good. We've got full reservoirs and we'll have some water, but if we go back into another drought period, it's a stressed resource. We don't live in an area that gets a lot of rain and occasional periods of sunshine. We live in an area that's basically a desert that we brought water to. So we have to make good use of those resources. And if I can save 50% of my outdoor irrigation by properly using a good mulch layer there, then I'm in. If that's the only reason I'm doing it, I'm in. I think that's a good enough reason. So reason number 3, mulch brings back all of our beneficials. It brings back all of our bioactivity, mycorrhizal activity, earthworms, beneficial insects and fungi that help our tomatoes and our ligestrums and our fruit trees and our roses to grow and feed in a more natural manner. They can take up natural resources out of that soil. As that mulch breaks down, there's elements that help to move fertilizers and move things through the system of the tree to make the system of the tree grow in a more natural form. That is huge. If you don't have mulch on the surface, you virtually have zero bioactivity in your soil. Bioactivity is nature. It's the way things were meant to grow naturally. So a farmer, they can go in and supplement that with spray. They're going to go in and spray 2 times a month probably on average for most farmers. So they can supplement fertilizers and they can supplement nutritional value, and they can put their pesticides and their fungicides and all of those different things into their spray and supplement everything they want. So you guys like to go out and spray twice a month? I don't either. I don't like to spray at all if I don't have to. So that mulch layer to me brings back the tree's ability to flourish in a more natural form. And I think that is gigantic. If that was the only viable reason to mulch, I'm in. I'm going to do it for just that reason. So there's 3 great reasons right there. Keeping the summertime soil temperatures cooler, making better use of our irrigation water by 50%, the repopulation of all of our bioactivity and our mycorrhiza in our soil. So there's 3 wonderful reasons to mulch. The 4th one, simple. What's the worst chore in the landscape? 4-inch layer of mulch does not allow weed seeds to germinate through it. You may get a few milkweed or something that are going to germinate on the surface, but in general, you're going to cut your weeding down by about 90%. So if it was that reason alone, I'm in. So there's 4 great reasons to mulch. So does anybody have a reason why they feel they shouldn't mulch? Yes?
Well, I like mulch, but I get like wind. It just seems like it.
Wind?
Wind, the wind.
Okay, you're using the wrong mulch. You're using little chunky, little half-inch chunks. What you should be using is the biggest grade that you can find. When I go and buy mulch from the green waste recycler, they basically have about 5 different grades. They've got half-inch, they've got 1-inch, 2, 4, and 6. So 6-inch grind is anything that fell through that biggest filter. It could be little small chunks, but it's going to be big 6-inch chunks in there as well. And that doesn't move in the wind. So look for the biggest grind that you can get. Also, what you want to look for is biodiversity. I never want to use all cedar. I don't want to use all redwood. I don't want to use all eucalyptus or all olive or all grass clippings or all stable rakings. But I can use all of those things at a percentage. And the more biodiversity that you have, the better off you are. So that's why I really like the recycled green waste. It's all the stuff that the arborists brought in and the gardeners brought in, and it's construction fall off, so it's old ground up 2x4s and all different types of wood product. It's biodiverse. It doesn't have a large percentage of anything in it, but then I can take that home and maybe I have a couple of goats and I have some stable rakings, or maybe I have a couple of bags of lawn clippings every week, or maybe I have a big pine tree that drops a barrel of pine needles every couple of weeks. I can always add those things into it because I already have the biodiversity there. So I can add other things, little bits and pieces of other things, and that still adds to the quality of my mulch. Ooh, a lot of questions over here. Yes?
Do they always talk about what they put in there, as far as nothing treated gets in there?
Remember how many mulch studies I said I've been involved in?
Yes, that's what
7 or 8 different mulch studies. Recycled green waste has always won. It's always been the best quality mulch that we've found. Every one of those mulch studies has run for toxicities. We've never found anything measurable as far as toxic in that waste. So I've had people tell me, oh yeah, well I was herbicide in there and it killed all my whatever, or something like that. But in general, they're probably looking for another excuse. So green waste recycled mulch has been used for 30 years in California. I've been using it for about 29. The first couple of years I was scared of it myself. And then a couple of arborist friends of mine said, hey, let me dump some, we got some of this stuff, it's a good load, it's mixed with all these different products, let me dump it out on the back of your property. And I thought, yeah, you know what, I can use it in the pathways and stuff like that. So they dumped it out there. I had 2 old Zutano avocado trees that were probably 75 years old. And they both were infected with Phytophthora cinnamomum, avocado root rot. They were sunburnt. They were horrible looking, you know, and I was ready just to chop them out. So when they came in and they dumped the load, it spilled all over around one of those trees, you know, to the point where it was this high up on the trunk and all around the tree. And I didn't care. I was going to take the trees out anyway. So I was afraid to use it. So I let it sit there. And I let it sit there for a year. And then I started looking at those two trees, which both looked alike at one time. And all of a sudden, the flush of foliage on it, it looked great. I went and dug into the mulch a little bit. There's earthworms down there. And the other trees just sitting out in the barren sand and gravel. So at that point, I thought, you know, there's more to this than I've really considered. So I started talking to more and more people that were in the know on using different types of mulches. And that's why I got involved in some of these studies, because we've never been able to find any of those things that were the wives' tales, that people said, watch out for this, watch out for that. You'll get a disease, you'll get a bacteria, you'll have termites, you'll have weeds that you never had before. None of those things are true. None of those things have ever happened. Termites don't live in mulch. They'd live in this desk. They live in big chunky wood that they can colonize through, but they don't live in mulch. You know, the bacteria and diseases, once they're gone, once they're in a mulch layer, they're gone. They don't affect anything anymore. If you've got peach leaf curl infected leaves that fall on the ground, it doesn't climb back up in the tree and reinfect the tree. So the only thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't have something that's really colonizing it. You know, I've had people say, well, it's hard to see the gophers under there. You know, well, yeah, okay, it's hard to see the gophers, but maybe you better be a little more aggressive on gopher hunting. Or, you know, well, the ants are in there. Hey, control your ants. The ants are everywhere. If they're not in the mulch, they're going to be somewhere else anyway. So you look for your issues as issues and you control those issues, and don't be afraid of the mulch. Yes?
We mulched our orchard and found the same thing. The trees after a year or two just, oh my God, they were like new trees. But we found the gophers left once we mulched because the mulch blocked the weeds that they were eating. And
Yeah, and if you're taking away their food source, they're going to move on.
it was amazing.
Absolutely.
It's like there was so many pluses outside of just weed control or cooling the ground.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I could do a whole 2 hours on mulching, and you know, I just can't tell you how important those attributes are, and how I hear in every single lecture I do, people want to say herbicide, bugs, termites. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. Yes?
What about, like, increased nitrates when they're going through the cycle of decay? I've heard that that can actually have a negative effect on rob the plant of important nutrients.
What's the cheapest element in fertilizer? Yeah. So I'm going to supplement a little more nitrogen. But you know, that, even then, once you get that bioactivity working, after about, you know, like 12 to 18 months, it's supplying more than it's taking away. There's an initial draw of nitrates during the original decomposition period of the mulch, during the composting period. But other than that, and it's almost negligible. I mean, you can, you know, throw $1 worth of nitrogen on there and you're fine. Yeah.
By Yosemite, it's called Oakhurst, Westlake.
I know Oakhurst very well.
Yeah, they have thousands of trees that are killed by the bark beetle,
Mm-hmm.
and they're chipping those trees and spreading those chips everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Sure.
There's no bark beetle eggs or anything in those?
Well, if you're chipping it, you're losing all that. You know, you're breaking down the insect's ability to colonize that tree. They're not going to colonize chips. Unfortunately, in Oakhurst, and I just sold a piece of property up in Mariposa that I've had for 40 years, and unfortunately there's a whole lot of dead trees up there, and they're never going to be able to get ahead of the dead standing trees. So all they're really trying to do now is to create fire breaks. So they're trying to get rid of trees in an area so that they can control fires as they come through in the future. Because they know with all those dead trees up there, the wildfires are going to be horrendous. So, yeah. Well, my cabin in Mariposa burned about 10 years ago in the fire up there. And At that point, I just was kind of done with it. So, and I honestly, I had a 100-foot fire break, and it still took it out. Okay, let's get back to gardening. Yes.
How do you feel about weed block underneath mulch? Is it unnecessary?
I don't like it, but if it's breathable and you feel that there's an advantage of putting it there, I'm okay. Never use plastic, but if you use like a Tyvek or a permeable, something that the water can move through, then you should be okay with it. But I don't personally, I've never used it, but we did use it in the mulching studies. We used Tyvek. We used a felt type product. I forget what it was called, and then we also used plastic. So none of them performed very well in the mulch studies. It was better off to have that decomposing layer touching the soil. Okay, any other comments on mulching? Yes?
I have a mature pine tree that has really poor soil under it. You maintain the pine needles on top,
Mm-hmm.
but the soil just doesn't improve, and the roots are so close within the soil, I can't even mildly till anything in.
Yeah, so I mean, you really, underneath mature trees, you don't want to till anymore.
No.
So you just want to maybe add something else to that mulch layer, but besides just pine needles. Although in nature, that's probably almost all that's going to be there is pine needles. But I think in a domestic situation, the more biodiversity that you get, the better off you would be. Okay, let's move on to irrigation. Now that we all understand the attributes of a proper mulching program, we mentioned that one of the attributes of mulching was that we can irrigate about 50% less than if we had unmulched soil, so we can save some water. So basically, I think there's some important considerations with irrigation. And number one is, since water is an important and stressed resource within California, we want to make sure that we do our best to make the best use of the water that we have available to us. So I'm a big advocate of making sure that you have zero runoff. If there's any water running out into the street when you're irrigating, you're doing a disservice, and you need to make sure that you correct that by either changing the configuration of your soil so that you're maintaining that runoff, or you need to change the sprinkler heads so that they only irrigate within an area where you want to make sure you're irrigating. It doesn't do you any good to irrigate the sidewalk or the street or any concrete patio. So spend some time working with your irrigation system to make sure that you've accomplished a zero runoff system. And if you do have some runoff, say coming off of the bottom of a lawn area or something, use it to your advantage. Channel it out so that you can irrigate something else with it. Just don't let it run down the street. So making sure that you have a tight system is important. And it doesn't have to be done in the next 3 days, but you want to make sure that you're looking at that system valve by valve. And a lot of people have their systems come on at 4 o'clock in the morning. They don't even know if they have a broken sprinkler head. I like to walk early in the morning, and most everybody's watering 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and you see an irrigation system come on, and here's a geyser 12 feet up in the air, and that water's half an inch stream of water, and it's running down the street. And a week later, still doing the same thing. A month later, it's still doing the same thing. You know what? At 5 o'clock in the morning, you can't see what it's doing. Most people aren't up walking around like crazy me, but so you got to run your system when you're there. You got to run your system and walk it. You got to go out and understand what your system is doing. And the worst thing that ever happened to irrigating in general was the invention of the mindless timer system. Timers don't think. Timers are absolutely mindless. You can set them. So you can set them to come on at 6:15 to 6:45, and then the one to come on from 6:45 to 7:15, and that's up to you. You can set those systems to do whatever you want them to do. And you know what that means? You're the brain. You're the one that has to think for that timer system, because it doesn't think for itself. And I do a lot of consultations, and I'll go and look at somebody's landscape, and you walk out into this lawn and it goes squish, 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 and I say, how often do you run your sprinklers? Oh, the gardener has them set to come on every morning. Every morning? Yeah, with a timer? Yeah, it's how long has it been like that? Well, they put the sod in 4 years ago. So it's been doing that for the last 4 years. Yeah, absolutely. You know, they're spending good money on fungicides and things like that. So the first thing you want to do is determine whether you really need to water. And that's going to change frequently throughout the year. You think you're going to water the same in November as you do in August? No. You think you're going to water the same now in April as you do in July? Of course not. So you need to understand it. You need to understand the season, the needs of the plants, and our weather patterns. I don't know what you guys had out here, but in the last couple of set of storms that we had, I had 3.2 inches of rain. So my system's off. I'm not going to irrigate anything for a while. I can probably go at least into the second week of April, or maybe even the third week of April, before I even considered turning on an irrigation valve. So different times of the year, different types of weather, different types of needs for the plant material. When the plants are growing aggressively, in the spring they're blooming, they're setting their fruit, they're putting their rosebuds on, your tomatoes are, you know, growing like a madman so that they can give you some tomatoes in the summer. They're using a little bit more water. In the summer, it's hot. August, 100 degrees, 95 degrees. Those plants are using a lot of water at that time of year. So when the needs are there, that's when you want to really irrigate heavily. And when you irrigate, make it count. 5 minutes of irrigation doesn't do anything. 5 minutes of irrigation is worthless. So if you're watering 5 minutes a day, 7 days a week, you'd be better off to irrigate a half an hour once a week and make that water count. Let it soak down. Let it really saturate that area. And then, before you irrigate again, check it out. See if you need to irrigate again. How many people have a moisture meter? Not that many of you. So I would say the next time you go into a home improvement center or a retail nursery, you know moisture meters? I was in the 99-cent store about a month ago, and they had a whole barrel full of moisture meters, 99 cents. They had some with ladybugs on them, and they had some with butterflies, and they had some with Mickey Mouse, and you know, I thought, this is awesome. You know, I bought like 30 of them, and I've been giving them away, and I have a moisture meter that years and years ago, I think I paid about $200 for it. So I set it next to the Mickey Mouse and the ladybug, and put my moisture meter in, and you know what? They said exactly the same thing. So 99 cents, average retail nursery sells them for about $6 or $7, and it will make you the brains of your irrigation system. It's going to tell you exactly what you need to know. It's just a simple probe and a gauge that says wet, moist, and dry. So if I go around my Meyer lemon tree and I stick it in the ground 3 or 4 times, you know, 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches deep, and it says wet, 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 I don't need to irrigate. If it says moist, 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 I don't need to irrigate. When it gets down to somewhere between moist and dry, I'm going to irrigate thoroughly and then let it go back to that point again before I irrigate again. So for somewhere between 99 cents and $10, you can be the master of your irrigation system. And if that doesn't save you $100 worth of water in a year, then you know, you're not doing it right. Because most people, when they start to use a moisture meter, when they go out and actually make a measurement, everybody realizes, you know what, I've been watering too much. And almost everybody waters too much. Almost everybody wastes our most valuable. I'm not saying that any of you guys do. So, you know, don't get me wrong. But, you know, if you walk down the street and look at your neighbors' irrigation patterns and step on some of their lawns and see how things, you know, look, see how many times a week they're irrigating in February, you'd probably be really surprised at the amount of water that's actually wasted. So I guess really what I'm saying is make good use of your water. Make sure if you have an old-fashioned system that's based on a timer, that you're willing to be the brains for the timer. I usually shut off my system about the 1st of November, and in an average rainfall year, I won't irrigate until sometime in March or the 1st of April. So that's November, December, January, February, March, maybe into April. That's somewhere between 4.5 and 6 months where I don't irrigate at all. In a dry year, like 2 years ago, I think I irrigated 6 times between November and April. This year, I irrigated in December, I irrigated a couple times in January, and I think I irrigated the first week in February. So this year it was probably 4 times. Then we got some rain after that, so it worked out well. So the nice thing is I can change my pattern. I can watch Dallas Rains on the 6 o'clock news, and he says, you know what, Tom, it's going to rain this week. We might get 2 inches, we might get 1.5 inches. And I said, good. I can hold off and I can wait and let it happen naturally. And if if it doesn't rain, I'll go back and do a supplemental irrigation. So it gives you the ability to manage your system. And don't let that timer think for itself. You have to be the brains for that timer. Now, fortunately for you guys, a couple of incredible things have happened in the last 30 years as far as irrigation. There's 2 well, they're not new systems anymore, but they're not the $59 5-station timer. There's a system that's based on weather station data, and there's a system that's based on a tensiometer. Tensiometer is like that probe on the moisture meter. It measures the amount of moisture that's in the soil. So a system that's based on weather station data boots it up every morning and says, it's going to be 61 degrees and there's a 70% chance of rain today. We're not going to come on and water. The next day it's going to be 72 degrees and there's only a 10% chance of rain, so we'll water, maybe we'll water a little bit. It's going to be 95 degrees today and there's no chance of rain, so let's come on and do a full irrigation cycle. So those systems based on local weather station data, those systems think for themselves. The tensiometers measure the amount of moisture in the soil, so they naturally come on when that percentage gets down below your minimal percentage that you set it at. So 60% fine, 50% fine, 40% will come on and do a 20% irrigation, 10% will come on and do a full set. So those systems are wonderful, and they actually do think for themselves. So if you're looking at replacing the old 5-station timer, consider one of those 2 systems. And I've been looking at them for many years. The tensiometer system I remember first looking at about 30 years ago. And at that time, the brain was about as big as this desk. And it was $3,500. And I thought, whoa, boy, I could buy a car for that. I'm not spending that much money on a irrigation timer. I can go out and twist valves, and I have no problem with that. I looked at that system about 2 weeks ago up at Farm Supply in San Luis Obispo. It's $199 now. So it's not the $59 timer, but for that extra $140, I guarantee you're going to save that in the first year or more, maybe double that in the first year. Yes?
How does that work with the sensing satellite? Like, say you have a tree that needs a deep watering once a week, and then of course your lawn, out here, in a week would be like crisp.
Yeah, well, you're gonna set it up on different stages. Yeah, you're gonna set it up. I'm gonna irrigate my tree separate from my lawn. They have 2 completely different root systems and 2 completely different uses as far as that water
So
goes.
it's sensing when to come on, but then you're controlling how long.
Not necessarily. You can. You absolutely can, and you can run these manually too. You can turn any one of those systems on. I can say, well, you know what? I'm going to be gone for a week, and it's going to be hot, and I know my wife's not going to pay attention to these trees, so I'll just kick it on and run it for a full cycle and let it do its thing. So all of these can be manually overridden or completely shut off if you want to do that. But the systems themselves function pretty well. But you're gonna set it up in by station. So I'm going to have one station for my lawn and one station for my rose garden, one station for my fruit trees, and so on. So that you're no. Well, if it's going to rain, yeah, the whole thing's going to shut down.
You're talking about 3 different systems there.
Well, three different valves. Each one of those is going to be a different station.
So different tensiometers.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, any other questions on irrigation? I'm pretty vague because I'm not going to go into detail and tell you what type of head to use and what kind of a system to set up. My system is a mishmash. I've got everything from orchard spinners to drip systems to shrub heads to you name it. My system is a little bit of everything, and you know what? It all works. They all deliver water from point A to point B, and as long as you're doing that with no runoff effectively, and irrigating thoroughly when you do irrigate, and irrigating smart. That's my main message on irrigation. However else you want to set it up over and above that is all your choice. And you know what? If you go to some of these guys, I know Ewing Irrigation does it. If you go and go, this is my layout. This is what here's my lawn, and here's my fruit trees, and here's this, and here's that. As long as you're buying the stuff from them, they'll set up the system for you. So, and a lot of I don't know about this water department, but a good friend of mine that's an irrigation contractor that works mainly for Bear Valley Irrigation in like the city of Highland and East Highlands and that area there. He goes around and installs smart systems for free. You call up the water company and go, I'll take one of those smart systems, and they call him and say, hey, Dwayne, go out to this address and this address today and put in the smart system, and the irrigation district pays for it. So you might look into that. You might see what these guys offer or what your local irrigation district offers. My irrigation district doesn't offer that, but I also need to own shares in my irrigation district, and they're pretty stingy nowadays. So, but you know, irrigate smart. Make sure when you do irrigate, you make it count, and make sure that you're doing it with no runoff. And that's my message on that. So let's talk about.
Wait, I have one question.
Okay,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Annoyingly curious. What's your favorite system for watering fruit trees? Drip, bubbler?
Like I said, my system's a mishmash of all of that, and it all works. So, you know, choose whatever you like. You know, you like to look at the spinners go around and around? I like that. That looks nice. You don't want to see it? You put a drip tape under the ground? That's fine. They all work.
I have modes with a bubbler.
Yeah.
And I heard then the mold fills up and the truck gets wet. I heard that was bad for your truck to get wet.
How often are you irrigating?
Well, it depends. The citrus are different than the nuts.
So if your system came on for 5 minutes every day and filled up that mode every day, that would be bad. If it comes on once a week or once every 2 weeks, not bad at all. Yeah. Okay, off to fertilizer. So every bag of fertilizer has 3 numbers on the bag. What do those numbers represent? Nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, potassium. So those elements do a couple of different things for us, and they do them fairly effectively. So what does nitrogen do? We already discussed it. You guys all know what it does. Green, vigorous, fast growth. So if you want your lawn to look like a golf course, you can get the sulfate of ammonia, 2100, and throw it out on the lawn, and the lawn Bermuda grass perks up and turns green, and you better make sure the mower blades are sharp, because you're going to be out there pushing that lawnmower a couple of times a week during the prime growing season if you're feeding with a high nitrogen fertilizer. So what does the phosphorus and the potash do for us? Structure, root stability, the ability for the tree to be stable and ground stable. And so if I'm looking at those 2 elements, I'm going to get more in the way of stability, and I'm going to get more in the way of the promotion of flowering wood. So what does every fruit tree have to do before it produces a fruit? Has to flower. So the most important consideration for fruit production is getting those trees to flower and getting a strong flower set. A weak flower set can fall off in the Santa Ana wind, a couple of days of rain, no bee activity. So weak flower sets happen quickly, and they're very susceptible to any type of physical stress. A strong flower set, on the other hand, will bloom over a longer period of time. It'll give you more diversity as far as the weather conditions that it's blooming during. It'll give you more opportunity for bee activity and cross-pollination, and in turn will give you a much, much better fruit set. So if I'm planting a young tree, I don't necessarily want that tree to produce fruit the first year or maybe even the first 2 years. I want to put that little tree in the ground and chop it back and restructure that whole head, develop a really nice strong root system, and develop a structure that's going to allow me to produce fruit for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, who knows. So in a situation like that, I'm going to look for more of a balanced fertilizer, something where I have the P and the K, but I have a fair amount of nitrogen, so I'm going to get that stability, I'm going to get that growth, I'm going to get that establishment of canopy so that my trees can be fruiting able. Now that normally it takes me about 2 years to get my trees up to my full chosen size. So at that point, nitrogen becomes much less important to me than it was when I was trying to grow structure. Now I want to grow fruit. I want to push flowers, I want root stability, and I want to grow fruit. So the P and the K, the trace elements, zinc, iron, and manganese, all of those things are beneficial elements to help to produce a strong flower set. So once my tree is up to my chosen size, I'm going to take away as much of the nitrogen as I can, and I'm going to go for high P and K with trace elements, and I like a humic acid base because it helps to counteract the alkalinity in our water, or at least neutralize the soil conditions. So when I'm growing a tree, I probably want something like you could use there's triple 15s out there. There's 12, 7, 6. There's all kinds of different blends where it's higher in nitrogen, or nitrogen is in a balance with the phosphorus and the potash. But when that tree's done up to size, I don't want to really push it anymore. I don't want to grow it too much anymore. I want to produce fruit. Then I want the nitrogen to be 25% of what the other elements are. So at that point, I'm looking for a 3-12-12. A little bit of nitrogen to keep color and structure, but a lot of P and K, zinc, iron, and manganese, humic acid base. That's going to give me that root stability, and it's going to give me that strong, long bloom set. So that's where your fruit comes from. So you want to make sure that you're feeding for a purpose. I don't want to give it the wrong thing. I get this call all the time. I planted an apricot tree 10 years ago. Gets plenty of water. It's down at the base of the lawn. Gardener throws lawn fertilizer on it. Every year it grows 10 feet and it never blooms. Well, you just explained your problem. It's staying wet all the time, and it grows 10 feet a year. It gets lawn fertilizer, so you're treating your apricot tree like your lawn, and you're expecting it to do something else for you. That's crazy. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. You don't treat a tree like your lawn unless maybe if it's Sequoia sempervirens and all you want is a big, tall, green tree. That's fine. That's what you want to do with it. But if I want peaches, if I want Meyer lemons, if I want mangoes or avocados, I'm going to give it the food that it needs to produce that, to do that. So the lower nitrogen, the higher P and K, the trace elements, and the humic acid base. They're all going to provide that for me. Now, timing is also important. You might remember when I started, I said, I have a 6-month on, 6-month off philosophy on fertilizing. So let me explain that a little bit. During the growth period, during the spring when a tree is going to bloom, it's going to set small fruit, it's going to start to grow out. In the summer, that fruit's going to mature. The tree's putting on some size and structure and foliage. That's when you want to concentrate on the food. If you look at a tree's year, like our day, you want to do the same thing. So when that tree wakes up in February, you want to make sure breakfast is there. I want to make sure those elements are already supplied. So end of January, first shot of fertilizer goes on. Tree wakes up, starts using that. Maybe around this time of year, April, mid-April, late April, I'm going to come in and I'm going to give it some lunch. It's already starting to grow. It's already done its thing. I'll give it its second meal of the season. Summer comes along, late May, June, early July, a little bit of dinner. I'm not feeding a lot at any one given time, but I'm giving it enough elements to keep it running through the growing season. So now it's had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it's after dinner for the tree. We've picked the fruit, and it's going into mid to late summer. I don't want to feed anymore. I don't want to treat that tree like that would be kind of like going to Starbucks at 11 p.m. and getting the venti frappuccino with an extra shot of espresso, and then going home and thinking I'm going to go to sleep now. So if I do that, I better have like a 5-hour drive or a 2,000-word article to write because I'm up for the next 5 or 6 hours. So if you feed that tree late in the summer, it's hard enough for us to get through a dormant season in California anyway. So why do I want to give that tree the equivalent of a big cup of coffee when I want the tree to start to shut down and get ready to go to sleep? So I want it to go dormant for the winter. I want it to defoliate. I don't want to push it late in the season where it's going to have all those elements still readily available in September and October and November and December when I want it to go to bed. So make sure you're feeding at the right time. Now container culture, a little bit different. Containers, like I said, are going to leach elements a lot quicker. So I'm going to feed my container plants probably 9 months out of the year. I may go all the way up to October and then stop and not feed November, December, or January, and then come in at the end of January and try again. But I'm not talking pounds per tree. I'm talking tablespoons or a cup or something like that, each time I do it, depending on how high the nitrogen level is. So feed for a purpose. You're feeding either for growth or you're feeding to promote flowers and fruit. So one of two things, two different types of meals that I'm going to give those trees to produce either growth or to produce fruit for me. And feed when the trees need it. Feed during the day. Feed them when they need to use their food through that daily cycle like we would have, and avoid the late season, late summer, fall, and early winter feeding. So you want to just let them use up everything, and then they may go dormant successfully on their own. I see people feeding late in the season all the time, and they have a peach tree that still has leaves on it in January, and it doesn't want to go dormant. There's no rest, that tree doesn't get an opportunity to rest. It's like, I had a good night's sleep last night. I didn't go out and play cards or smoke cigars or anything like that. I was good last night. I went to bed early, and I woke up this morning, and I felt good, and I had a good day. So, that's what you want that tree to do. You don't want that tree to have a weeknight's sleep and then expect it to do its job in the spring and the summer when it's tired. It's tired, and it doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to go dormant. It doesn't get any chill hours. It doesn't get a good night's sleep, and it's not going to produce well for you for that next year. So feed for a purpose, feed at the right times, make sure you're looking at the elements on that bag, not too much nitrogen once you get your trees up to size, and enjoy all the beautiful flowers and all the fruit that you're going to get. Any questions on that? I knew you'd have a question.
For flowers, does that have anything to do with any pheromones, or is it just the phosphorus and potassium?
I'm sure it has to do with pheromones as well, but we can't really supplement that. So all we can do, there's really 4 things that a tree responds to go into dormancy. One of those things is decrease in daylight hours. That's clockwork. It happens the same time every year. December 21 or 22 is always our shortest day, so that's nighttime. So that's when the tree should be going dormant. Now, you would think in response to shortened daylight hours that those would also be our coldest days of the year. And they should be, but they're not always. So you've got an element that we have no control over that's a positive every year, and then an element that should coincide with it, but it doesn't always. And then we have 2 other elements, which would be irrigation and fertilization, that will help to encourage growth or dormancy on a tree. So if we're using those properly, if you're using those to our advantage, then those are the 2 things that we have control over, and we can help that tree to get a good night's sleep. Does that make sense? Good. Yes?
Would these rules also apply to like shrubs, roses, and everything?
Okay, first of all, there are no rules to this. So everything I'm telling you here today are just things that have worked for me over the last 40 years. I want you guys to do what works for you. So don't ever say rule to me, because to me that's a bad word. There are no rules. It's whatever works for your individual situation. They will definitely work for evergreens as well as deciduous trees. Citrus and avocados don't go dormant, but they shut down for the winter. I don't want my Hass avocado to be vigorously growing if we have a freeze in January. I want the tips to shut down and the apical dominance to stop, and the tips will harden up for the winter, and if it does freeze, that tree's a lot less susceptible to that frost damage. If it's still growing out aggressively in January and it freezes, I'm going to lose all that tender vegetative growth. So even though other things may not go physically dormant, they do actually shut down for the winter as far as their growth pattern. So that's what we want to encourage. And it works the same with your roses and things like that as it would for any trees. Anything else on fertilizer? Okay. Let me give you a couple of minutes on pest control, and then we can do the break. So first of all, you guys are some of the luckiest gardeners in the world. You know why? We live in Southern California. We live in one of the nicest climates on this planet. It is an absolutely beautiful place. And I don't tell people about Southern California unless they live in Southern California. When I travel, I don't ever say, well, you should come out to Southern California and experience our beautiful weather. The Rose Parade does that every year. 20,000 people come out the week after the Rose Parade because they look and, wow, it's 15 below zero in Duluth, Minnesota, and it's 71 in Pasadena today, you know. I'm moving to Pasadena, so this climate is awesome. It's the one place where you can grow papayas next to your cherry trees. It's the one place where we can work in our yards 340 or 50 days out of the year. It's a spectacular climate. And due to that, our insect issues and our disease issues are minimal. We really don't have too many problems. We'll have some aphid and we'll have some mealybug and we'll have some scale and, you know, we've got some citrus leaf miner now, and you're going to get some peach leaf curl on your peaches and some powdery mildew on your roses. And, you know, there's a few basics that we can expect every year. And as long as we're using a maintenance program that's been set up for 100 years, we know how we can control all those issues. So what you want to do as far as pest control is make sure that you understand what the issue is. There are a lot of diseases out there like shot hole fungus that looks like insect damage. The first time I saw citrus leaf miner, I looked at it and thought, well, that's got to be some kind of a fungus. You know, look at that. It's not obviously not an insect, but it was. So understand your issue. If you have a problem and you don't really know what that problem is, you go out to that plant and you take some representative samples and you put them in a Ziploc baggie and you seal them up. Bring them into this group. You guys have experts in here that have been looking at these things for years. You guys have a coordinator that's probably seen all that. Take them down to one of the local retail nurseries. You know, take them to Parkview or take them to Louis and, you know, make sure it's sealed up in a Ziploc bag. Don't be dragging the big tree branch in there full of whiteflies and infect the whole nursery. Seal it up and take in a sealed sample and say, I don't know what this is. What can you tell me about it? And, you know, they'll look at it and go, well, that's citrus leaf miner. You know, you can use a product. If you want to be organic, you can use a product containing spinosad, and that's an OMRI registered organic. If you're not concerned with organics, you could spray a metacloprid, and that's going to control the problem. And you know, you can do lots of different things. Or you know what you can do? You can choose to do nothing. Citrus leaf miner is not harmful to the fruit. If I've got a full mature Washington navel tree, it's not going to damage the fruit on that tree. It's only going to twist the foliage up a little bit. You know what? At that point, I don't care. I can live with that. I haven't sprayed for citrus leaf miner in 5 years. So make sure you identify your problem. Make sure you know what you're looking at. And then my next question is always, what's my organic alternative? What can I do that's an OMRI registered organic that's going to control this? Or what other options even beyond that do I have? Well, if I have some aphid or I have some scale or I have some mealybug, a little $2 high pressure nozzle and my hose is going to knock all that out of the tree. Keep your trees clean. Keep your roses clean. Keep your plants clean. Keep all that old foliage out. Keep the dead wood pruned out. You know, make sure that you're keeping the dust off them in the summertime. That smog kind of settles on the foliage and gets kind of sooty. Wash them. Give them a shower. I go out 2, 3, 4 times every summer. First thing in the morning or late in the afternoon, hose and a high pressure nozzle, keep the trees clean. It's going to eliminate 95% of your creepy crawly insect problems. Takes out the aphid, takes out the scale, takes out the mealybug, creates an environment that spider mites don't reproduce well in. Citrus leaf miners don't like it. So just by keeping your trees clean, you can probably control 90% of your problems. And then if you have another issue, if you have something that you feel you need to treat for, you know you're not out there just randomly spraying all the time. So if you have an issue, get it identified. If you feel you need to treat for it, make sure you understand the product. Make sure you look for an organic. If you're using an organic or a non-organic, either way, make sure you understand the product. I always go back and use my dad as an example on this because when I was a kid, my mom and dad had 5,000 square feet of the most beautiful dichondra lawn you could ever imagine. You know, that late 50s, early 60s, all into the 70s, and dichondra was all the rage. It could have been the cover of Sunset Magazine, any one of those decades there. And my mom was proud of that lawn. She'd be out there in the evening with tweezers, picking spurge and oxalis and get, making sure it was just fantastic. And my dad, he was a spray guy. So every summer when it got hot, they'd get the flea beetles in there and they'd start chewing on the root system, and you'd get gray spots and brown patches, and my mom would tell my dad, hey, we better get some flea beetle spray on there. So my dad would go to the garage and get his glass spray jug, and he'd get his bottle of DDT, and my dad never measured anything, never paid any attention to measurements, never read the label on the bottle. He just knew this was the thing, so he'd put that in there, and then he'd take that spray bottle out. He'd be wearing shorts and flip-flops and a tank top and cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and he's out there with that spray, spraying all around, wind blowing in his face, never paid any attention to it. And even back then when I was a little kid, and I'd be thinking, that stuff stinks, man. He's out there with that toxic, spraying the yard, and he's not paying any attention. And even back then, I just thought, that's insane, Now, my dad lived a good, long life, and I honestly don't know why. But, don't be like my dad. Make sure that if you have to put anything on, any products, any type of a spray, I don't care whether it's organic or a chemical, protect yourself. Long pants, long sleeve shirt, gloves, mist mask, goggles, a hat. Protect yourself. Get out there and get dressed up, get suited up, understand the label, read the label, read it twice. Understand exactly what you're using. Make sure that if it says 1 ounce per gallon, you're using 1 ounce per gallon. Put in the right amount. All those products are designed to be used at what the label recommendation is. Don't spray during the heat of the day. Don't spray in the wind. If you're going to spray, it should be right at sunrise or right at sunset. I don't want to be out there when the bees are active and the butterflies and the hummingbirds are out there. If I'm going to spray anything, it's right at sunrise or right at sunset when there's no other activity going on. And then I'm going to go back in the garage. I'm going to clean my equipment. I'm going to put everything away. I'm going to take my clothes off. I'm going to throw them in the washer. I'm going to do a double rinse. Don't wash them with your wife's nightgown or your kids' pajamas. Just wash them on their own, and you've got that same set of clothes that you can use when you go out and spray again. Don't wear it to the dance or something like that. It should be strictly something that you're using when you're applying a product like that. So be safe. Understand your issue. Be safe with anything you're applying. Make sure you understand directions. Make sure you're spraying at the right time of day. Always look for the organic alternative if you can. Keep those trees clean. High pressure nozzle on a hose will do 90% of what you need to do without ever opening up a chemical product. So the PowerPoint presentation is kind of a conglomeration of things that we've been doing and looking at and working on for years, and some of it's old and some of it's new, but it's all what we would consider, viable information. So little self-promotion, Dave Wilson Nursery, the first name in fruit trees. This is backyard orchard culture. We're going to start by looking at a few commercial growing techniques that are really techniques that were backyard proven before they became commercial. So this is an example of an apricot orchard up in Tracy, California, and where apricots used to be planted at about 80 to 90 trees per acre. This particular planting is 12-foot roadways and 8-foot in between the trees. It's about 260 or so plants per acre. These trees are never winter pruned. The old winter pruning philosophy for prunus varieties in general is completely out of the picture now, so no winter pruning on apricots, plums, peaches, nectarines, or cherries. So most of this pruning on varieties like this that ripen up in the early part of summer is done mid to late summer. So the reasoning is they get a much better new flush of growth, and all that secondary flush of growth in the late summer is production wood for the following year. So they can maintain the tree size small. These trees are only about 8 feet tall. Like I said, 12 feet apart, 8 feet in the roadway. And the spread of bacteria and diseases during the winter pruning season is much greater than in the summer. So if they do their pruning in the summer, they have almost zero spread of the most devastating diseases, something like Eutypa that can wipe out trees, or bacterial canker that can take out entire orchards, doesn't spread during the summer months or the fall months when it's still warm. So the agriculture has pretty much gotten away from winter pruning, except when it comes to things like apples and pears. So here's another style. This is what we call perpendicular V. And this style is done for stability and the ability for the tree to hold a major amount of weight. So you can see down here it was topped low and grown out in a V form. And then all this growth will come off this fall before the tree goes completely dormant. And they can actually run a wire in between those two trees, and each side of the tree holds up the other side of the tree. So they can, on that little tree, they can grow 250 pounds of fruit. So this is horizontal oblique cordon. This is an ancient style that was done in Europe, especially France, from the Middle Ages on. These are apple trees that are grown on an espalier row, and the trees are 6 feet apart in the ground. They're on a double wire row, so every branch, every single branch on those trees has pretty much equal exposure as far as air movement and light exposure. So they get good quality fruit. They can go in and do their work without a whole lot of climbing up into the trees and do their thinning and do their harvest all from ground. So this is a crossover technique. This again was a technique that's used for holding weight. These are young peach trees, but what they've done here is they've actually brought it up about 24 inches and made that cut, and then they've grown a V out, and then they've crossed that V over itself. So this side comes from here, this side comes from here. There's one single wire in that row that the trees are stabilized on, and then as they become more mature, the trees hold themselves and don't rely on the wire anymore. This is a perpendicular V pear orchard. This is just outside of Sacramento, California. These trees are 3 feet apart on center, grown in that same V form. The amazing thing about this orchard, people think, oh, this is a new technique. This orchard's 90 years old. So this particular farmer grows about, in California, grows about half of the pears for the Harry and David's mail order catalog. So he's getting top dollar for this fruit. He's getting basically about $5 a pound for this fruit. And these small trees give him the ability, again, to do all that work from the ground. If they have to thin, if they have to cull, if they have to do harvesting or any work, it can all be done from the ground. Every pear has equal amount of light exposure and air movement. So techniques like this are not new techniques. They're ancient techniques, and they've been used for decades or hundreds of years or even thousands of years. We just kind of forgot about that in big agriculture in California. So a lot of people have gone back to things like this and are very, very successful with it.
So are those dwarf trees or what?
That makes no difference. When you're looking at selecting a tree, remember what we said about rootstock. You should be selecting rootstock for adaptability to your climate and adaptability to your soil conditions. Whether it's dwarf or semi-dwarf or standard, you're still going to be pruning that tree to establish the size that you want. So the wrong rootstock is going to be a dead tree. The right rootstock you can prune to any size you want. So this is a Gravenstein apple orchard. This is owned by my good friend Norman Heckler in Woodstock Valley, Connecticut. So this is about January 15th. You think Norm's going out to prune today? So, but if you look at these trees, Norm's done a great job over the years of coming up with that tall spindle style where he has all this secondary growth coming off of that and all this spur development and fruit development down here in that structure. So what Norm needs to do this year is he needs to get all this worthless whippy wood, all this vigorous growth off these trees. So the structure's already set, the structure's already developed. The fruiting body of this tree will never change. All you're going to do is prune out the vigor every year. That could have just as easily been done at harvest time in October, in November, before the first snow. Now Norm has to find time to go out between January 15th and bud break and get that work done. So Norm doesn't prune in January anymore. He now prunes in November every year. So everybody thinks that summer pruning is a new idea. So this is an ad that I found in Fruit Grower magazine from 1954. So it's not a new idea, but the equipment is still exactly the same. When you look at something like that, and if you go drive through Highway 126 through Fillmore and Santa Paula and into Ventura, or go down and drive through Fallbrook or Valley Center and look at the way that the orchards are maintained, they're all maintained by this type of equipment. They're all summer pruned in a hedgerow style. So this equipment goes along and takes the top out, comes back and takes the sides out, and you create a big long row of lemons or oranges or whatever they happen to be pruning with this equipment. So people think that this is something that you shouldn't do under a farm condition or you shouldn't do under backyard condition. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is not a detail prune piece of equipment. This thing prunes like a lawnmower. So it's going to leave some rough cuts. It's going to leave some big chops, but it absolutely allows the farmers to keep the trees maintained at a size that's manageable for them. So I'm not telling you to go and rent this piece of equipment and prune your 3 peach trees. But what I am telling you is that this is done every day, hundreds of thousands of times every year in commercial agriculture. They use techniques like this and they use styles like this on things that we think are new to backyard growing, when they're not. They're old, they're ancient. So how much fruit can one tree produce? So an 18-foot apple tree can yield 350 pounds of fruit. So that's 700 half-pound apples. So has anybody eaten 700 half-pound apples in a year? That would be 2 apples a day every day out of the year if you skip a couple of days. And I think that's pretty unreasonable. I don't need 700 half-pound apples off of any tree. In fact, if I get 40 or 50 or 60 off of any of my trees, I'm perfectly happy with that. So what are we going to do with all that fruit? Well, let's see. 700 half-pound apples, 6 apples per pie, 116 apple pies. So did anybody eat 116 apple pies last year? Because that's how you would use that fruit. I've always wanted to try it, but my wife and my cardiologist both have recommended against it. So I probably won't do it, but I do love apple pie. So the consideration here is you don't need a lot of fruit at any one given time. You need a little bit of fruit all the time. So this is a chart that's available on our website, and it's a fruit and nut harvest date chart. It runs from May to December. So I can look at all these deciduous fruit trees. It lists all of these things on here, from almonds and apples all the way down to walnuts. So you've got peach, plum, nectarine, figs, cherries, Asian pear, European pear, everything. It's all listed on there, persimmons. So I can take this chart and I can say, okay, what do I want for early May? I can get a couple of good nectarines. I can grow my blueberries. What do I want for June? I can do a couple of apple varieties. I can do some of my early plum varieties. I can chart. I can figure out a whole backyard landscape of fruiting varieties by using this chart and then going to a couple of other websites like the Laverne Nursery website, lavernenursery.com, and they have a chart for subtropicals. They have a chart for citrus. They have a chart for avocados. I know they do because I made those up 20 years ago. So they're all still on there. So you can get that information. It's all out there. Our tagging system now, we have green for early season, lavender for mid-season, kind of a sage kind of a color for late season. So even our tagging system reflects early, mid-season, late. So there's all kinds of information out there on when varieties ripen. Use that to your advantage. Don't overplant any one season. A little bit of fruit all the time instead of a lot of fruit at any one given time.
So that chart though depends on your conditions, right? But you have
That chart is a Central Valley ripening time, and it's generalized. So it's going to change every year down here or in the Central Valley due to weather conditions. Down here in general, it's 5 to 7 days ahead of what it is on that chart. Take it up into Oregon, it's 5 to 7 days later. So it does vary. And then every year, we have different harvest times here anyway. I'll have varieties this year that'll be a month later than they were last year, just because of the bloom time. Bloom time's late. So this is just general information. It's not the Bible. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen that second week of May every year like clockwork. It's going to change. But it's a guideline.
This is a naive question. Do they all kind of shift together?
Some varieties yes, some varieties no. So it just really depends on what they are. So, the main concepts: successive ripening, control tree size with summer pruning, grow what you like and what you'll use. Understanding your microclimate, we talked about that. This is my cousin's backyard up in Troutdale, Oregon. So there's no irrigation system out there. This was taken in the middle of summer. This is August in Troutdale, Oregon, and look how beautiful everything is. You think you could get away with that lawn in Riverside? No. But she understands her microclimate. She knows what she has to do to maintain this and to keep it looking good. So every place we go, every place we travel, every place you live is going to have a little different microclimate. So you want to understand all of those different microclimates. Here I can go to the Mediterranean and look, it's beautiful, it's oceanfront. I got this wonderful view, but it's a completely different climate than Troutdale, Oregon, or Riverside. Actually, it might be pretty close to Riverside, California. But so I'd be treating things differently there than I would in Oregon. This is the fruit tree graveyard of the United States of America. This is North Las Vegas. And this is their wonderful caliche limestone soil. So it's just absolutely horrible to grow anything in. But my good friend Bob Morris from the University of Nevada has grown a tremendous orchard in this soil because he thinks mulch. He understands mulch. We've done half a dozen different mulching studies. He's backed all of them. And he mulches like a madman, and he's got this beautiful 3-acre orchard in North Las Vegas where everybody else kills trees faster than you can get them in the ground. So, and he's got 12 inches of mulch on the ground. So here's an example of this is about a 10-year-old Santa Rosa plum, and we'll look at the evolution of this tree. In fact, my good friend and colleague Ed Livo, he planted this tree on a bet with a Northern California nurseryman that said, you can't keep a standard Santa Rosa plum tree small. And Ed said, yes, I can, and I'll document it and prove it to you. So this tree is now about 25 years old, and it's still in the orchard at Dave Wilson Nursery, and every summer it gets pruned down to look like that. You can see that's exactly the same tree, but you see where the branching starts, right down here at knee high. This isn't really a tree, it's a shrub, but it's all manageable. Everything is easy to get to. I can thin, I can harvest, I can prune, I can do all the work that I need to do. You can tell how old that picture is. Look at that phone. So I can do all the work that I need to do from the ground. Look at it before summer pruning and after summer pruning. It's a completely different tree, but now it's manageable. Let's hold questions until the end, otherwise I'm going to run out of time drastically. So prune after fruit set to help thin. I don't like to say that I'm lazy, but I am. And I'm not going to go out there and do all of this. I'm not going to go out there and thin 1,000 fruit off of a tree one by one, but if I make the right cuts, if I look at a branch and there's a triple or a double and I've got 20 or 30 fruit on each one of those branches, I take 1 or 2 out. So here with one cut, I probably thinned 20 fruit off that tree instead of standing there and doing all that. So you can easily make cuts in the late spring or early summer and incorporate thinning into some of those pruning cuts. There's that same Santa Rosa plum. So here it is. Here's Ed's sequence of events, or a sequence of evolution on this plum tree. This is year 1. You can also see Ed's evolution as we go on a few years into this project. So there's year 2. There's year 3. There's year 4. There's year 5. There's year 6. There's year 7. So, he's gone through a sequence of events on this tree to prove, he won the bet, by the way. I think it was $20. But we still have the tree there. We still maintain the tree after 25 plus years. It's still in the ground, and we still work with it and still look at it every year. So the philosophy here is prune to within reach so that you can reach the highest branches. You can do all your work easily from the ground. Canopy starts low at knee high, just like on that plum tree, so you have fruiting body that goes all the way down to within a couple of feet of the ground. There's the same plum tree. This is Harbir Singh. He's been with us now for about 20 years, and when he hired on, we gave him a pair of hedge clippers and told him to go prune that plum tree, and he's like, well, I've never pruned a fruit tree in my life. And we said, you're the one that we want to prune that tree then. So we don't want this to be overcomplicated. I want people to be able to do it that have never pruned a tree before. So Harbir went out and pruned it that day. Kind of made it look like a loaf of bread, which I thought was pretty cool. But we've had secretaries, receptionists, truck drivers, all kinds of people that didn't understand tree pruning have pruned this tree every single year. So, and it still produces 150 or 200 fruit every single year. So it's not rocket science. You don't have to read Luther Burbank's Methods and Discoveries 12-volume set to learn how to prune fruit trees. Get out and make it fit your specifications. Make it fit your size. Make it fit your designated space. But don't overcomplicate it. Everybody wants to overcomplicate it. They want to get technical and they want to hear all these different things. And then they go out and look at the tree and they're like, I don't know what to do. Just do it. If anything tonight, what I want to make you comfortable with is the fact that you can grow fruit trees in your backyard without having a master's degree in horticulture. So here's an example of what a standard Santa Rosa plum or a standard Fuji apple or a standard Bing cherry could be easily 30 feet tall. So that's an unpruned tree. So to grow an unpruned fruit tree, number one, doesn't make any sense. So when somebody says, well, how big will that tree get? The answer is as big as you want it to get. So, and I think, okay, 30 feet, maybe I don't want to have to manage a 30-foot tree. So I know what I'll do. I'll go get a semi-dwarf. Semi-dwarf will be my saving grace for size control, right? Everybody has this perceived, expectation of what a semi-dwarf is going to be. And you know what it is? It's the perfect tree. Semi-dwarf's never going to get any bigger than I want it to get. It's going to be this perfect tree all of its life. I don't really have to do any work on it. You know what the average size semi-dwarf is? 18 feet. So I'm still looking for this. So if I have a semi-dwarf, I'm still going to have to prune probably 10 feet out of it. I'm going to have to keep it low. I'm going to grow it at less than 50% of its potential. But I'm not going to use that rootstock because it's semi-dwarf. I'm going to use it because it's adaptable to my soil. I'm going to use it because it's adaptable to my geographic area and my weather conditions. So that's the most important consideration. Not whether it's dwarf or semi-dwarf or standard. But okay, semi-dwarf's still too big, we'll get a dwarf. That's only 12 feet tall. So now I still have to take 7 feet out of the tree every year or 6 feet out of the tree every year to keep it whatever my chosen size is. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense to use rootstocks for size control. Use rootstocks for adaptabilities, and you keep the tree pruned to whatever size works for you. So this is the third alternative, but unfortunately, or fourth alternative, there aren't very many of these. This is what we call a genetic dwarf, and this is a peach variety called Bonanza. These trees, when this photo was taken, these trees were 27 years old. So it's a genetic dwarf. It stays dwarf within itself. It doesn't matter whether you bud this onto a standard rootstock or a semi-dwarf rootstock. The tree's never going to get any bigger than about 6 or 7 feet. So unfortunately, there's only about a dozen of these varieties out there. So unless you want peaches and nectarines, if that's all you want, you're good. But if you want anything else, you're out of luck because they really don't have them. A few citrus that are going to stay real small, like kumquats and things like that, but not even many of those. So, but I mean, beautiful. Wouldn't you love that tree in your landscape? I mean, that's people pull over on the side of the road. They come and knock on your door when they see something like that. So we're looking at space-saving high-density plantings. This is one of our projects at Dave Wilson Nursery right now. This is a backyard-style orchard with about 70 trees in it that we put in 6 years ago. So this was the second year in the ground. And this is one of our annual tours that we run through the nursery. In fact, these three characters no, not that guy, that's me. These two characters right here are members of the Orange County Master Gardener Program. So they came up to one of our tours. So these trees, this is second year in the ground. So if we take this out and look at what we've done, here's 4-in-1 cherry, second year. So these trees are basically 18 inches apart, planted in a square. So what we've been able to do is put in an early mid, a late mid, and a late. And for cherries, that's only about 30 to 45 days difference in harvest time. But we've incorporated the pollinators in there, and we've got, instead of 2 weeks worth of cherries, we've got a month and a half worth of cherries out of that combination. So none of these are going to produce a lot of fruit, but they're all going to produce enough fruit for their season. So there it is at 6 years old, same combination, and there it is at 11 years old. So just by maintaining tree size, you keep those trees equal growing size and in balance, and you can maintain that combination for many years. Here's a 4-in-1 peach nectarine and a nectaplum, and that's in that project that we put in about 6 years ago. Here it is last summer when we summer pruned it, and that was probably about August 20th or so. Don't mistake this. This is the big oak tree that's down on the hillside behind it, but this is the tree size right here. So that's that exact same combination that we just looked at. This is second year in the ground, that's 6 year in the ground. So here's 4 peaches in one hole. Again, about 18 or 20 inches apart. So you can incorporate your early mid, your late mid, and your late. Have 2 months worth of peaches out of the same amount of space where you would have only had a couple of weeks before. So and I always get people that say, well, I want more fruit than that little tree is going to produce. So this is Kristen Camarena. She's 5'2". She's one of our office assistants. This is a heavenly white nectarine that's, you can see, no more than about 6.5 feet tall. We counted about 150 of these softball-sized fruit on it that day. So you think you're not going to get enough fruit out of a small tree? What are you going to do with those? What are you going to do with 150 softball-sized nectarines that are all going to ripen up in a 2-week period of time? This is Richard Douglas. He's the owner of one of our retail customers up in Placerville, California. And Richard has a beautiful retail nursery, and part of his landscape runs along a 400-foot-long gravel parking lot. And what Richard did was he had this kind of a pipe rail fence in there, so he decided that every 10 feet he's going to plant a tree right up against the fence, and anything that grows along the fence he's going to leave it alone, and anything that grows out into the parking lot or out into the road he's going to cut off. So this is what I would call a casual style espalier. It's not formal, it's not supported, it doesn't have a wire system behind it or a trellis system behind it. It's just something that's allowed to grow this way and not that way. So it's an absolutely beautiful planting. He's got 40 trees in 400 feet and eats fruit from spring to fall. So high density plus size control, backyard orchard culture, just like we talked about. Here's 7 trees in 12 feet, so that's 2 different plantings. Here's a 4-in-1, here's a 3-in-1. Here's cherry, peach, and plum, 24 inches on center. So compatibility is important. You want to make sure that you're putting in varieties that can grow on the same rootstocks. If it can be grafted onto the same rootstock, it can be compatibly grown in a combination. So I wouldn't recommend a Meyer lemon and a papaya and a Bing cherry. That's not going to give you a compatible combination. But these are all in the prunus family, and they can all be budded onto the same root. So technically anything that can be grafted together can be grown together in a combination. So apples with apples, pears with pears, citrus with citrus, avocados with avocados, and anything in the prunus family can grow together. So we even do multiple budded trees with 4 different prunus, a peach, a plum, a nectarine, and an apricot, all grafted onto the same tree. So
Would not work better? What is giving you more results? One that's grafted with 4 or 4 trees planted next to each other?
well, here's my philosophy on that. I love multiple budded trees because Dave Wilson Nursery is the largest grower of multiple budded trees in the world. And they're expensive. And I'm a commission-based sales rep. So I make a lot of money on multiple budded trees. And I think we've come up with some really good combinations over the years. We do anything and everything you can imagine. But if you buy a Dave Wilson multiple budded tree, you're going to buy what I want you to have. If you do a multiple planted combination, you plant what you want. So, and I think we've done a good job of putting combinations together, but it may not be the combination that you want. So both alternatives work equally as well. And of course, I'd recommend that you buy multiple budded trees because, you know, I make a couple of bucks on each one. So I'm happy with that. But in general, you want to do what's right for you and not what's right for me. I'll survive either way. So here's a 3-in-1 fruit salad. So this is actually a multiple grafted tree. So here you've got your apricot and a peach and a nectarine. So all grafted together on the same tree. Remember we talked about planting specs on that, to plant the weakest bud or the weakest tree to the south or southwest, the more vigorous tree in the back, and to maintain a balance between the varieties. So here's a multiple budded apple, 2-year multiple budded apple. Here's the most vigorous graft. It's already been topped up there at about 6 feet. And here's the weakest graft. It's only about 18 inches. So we can't make that weak graft grow any faster if we have all that vigor there. So the only thing we can do is remove the vigor. The hardest cut anybody will ever make is that cut right there. Because everybody looks at that tree and says, I just paid $100 for this tree and I just cut it in half. So I wish I would have only had to pay 50 for it. But this is the way you get balance. This is the way that you achieve success. If you don't do that from the first cut to the end of the lifestyle of the tree, one of those varieties is going to want to dominate and it's going to overpower the others, and you start to lose the weak grafts one by one. So within maybe the first year you'll lose the weakest graft, second year you might lose the second weakest graft, third year or fourth year your $100 4-in-1 tree is now just a single variety. So you've got to maintain balance. So here's a multiple budded pluot with a couple of different varieties on it. Look at that little tree. Look at all that fruit on that nice little tree. That's beautiful. So the philosophies, successive ripening, fruit all season, more fruit in less space, accommodate pollinating varieties, control size with summer pruning, easy maintenance, grow what you like and what you use, endless aesthetic possibilities. Remember, that's important to me. I want it to look good. I don't want it to look like a farmer's orchard. So, you know, whatever you choose to do, you always want to take that into consideration. So here's just a plum and pluot planting, 2 feet on center. Here's 12 trees in 40 feet. So these are hedgerow style. This is something that you would use to screen off a portion of the yard or make a living fence out of it, or a screen or something like that. So this was actually a project we did at the nursery, and you can see here it's been neglected for a couple of years. Didn't get summer pruned that summer. Here it is in winter. It's all rangy and overgrown, and the orchard manager came to Ed and I and said, you guys got to do something with that project. You know, it's looking like a madman out there in the field, and if you guys aren't going to maintain these trees, I'm coming in with a chainsaw and a bulldozer and I'm going to put something else in there that we can make some money off of. So Ed and I thought, well, we can do the chainsaw thing. So we went out there and cut the trees back just to basic structure. So right back down just to basic trunks is kind of what we did. The Hickman Chainsaw Massacre of 2004, well known in the Central Valley. So here's what it looked like the first summer. So after growing out of bounds for a couple of years, it came back and flourished in that first summer and was completely manageable again. We did lose one tree. We had that one tree that was cut real low, and we took all the live wood off and got down to the point where that tree was in so much shade before, it just didn't have the ability to survive. So that was our problem for not properly maintaining that orchard for a couple of years. It was our fault that we lost that one tree. So how many of you have ever driven up High 101 north of Santa Barbara, up there going on your way up to Buellton? This is the Santa Barbara Ranch up there. I've done a lot of work and a lot of consulting for them. And in March 2014, I drove up there and saw this. And I thought, man, that's a great example of trying to keep maintaining and getting medieval with it and turning it into a small tree. But these were giant trees. They were 30 feet tall, and they were way too big for them to maintain. And notice Santa Barbara Ranch. The highway runs right over here. I could almost throw a rock and hit the ocean from where these trees are planted. And look what they did for sunburn protection. You're taking away that tree's ability to shade itself. So when you do something dramatic and medieval like that, the first thing you do is you paint every bit of that trunk and right over the cuts. So there's March 2014. There's another shot from a little bit different angle from the same place. Here's May 2015. See how nicely they've grown back? Same two shots from the same two angles. Let's go back and look at them again. There's the first shot. There it is again. There's that second shot again. So that's 14 months later. And look how nice those trees have recovered. They maintain all these trees now at about 12 feet tall, and they've actually interplanted into this empty space. They've gone and interplanted 1 or 2 trees in between these trees, so they now have 2 or 3 times as many trees per acre. Their trees are all maintained. The liability insurance guys don't mind a 12-foot tree, but they won't insure you for a 30-foot tree. And now their yield has gone up 40% on that acreage. So they're making more money, they're paying less insurance, and everything's easy to maintain. So mulch, we talked about all the benefits of mulch promoting a healthy root system. So here's an example of mulching in a raised bed, that kind of a boulder style raised bed. So we're mulching on top, we're mulching on bottom. Those roots are going to grow right down and out into that soil. The idea of the raised bed is to create yourself an oxygenating layer where those top roots can breathe, where they can get away from a heavy soil condition. So this is the kind of mulch that I like, the kind of green waste recycled mulch that I like. Look how big some of those chunks are in there. There's chunks that are 12 inches long in there. So I don't like the bagged stuff. I don't like the little walk-on bark kind of stuff. I like biodiversity. I like a lot of different types of organic product in there, and I want the biggest size grind that I can get. It doesn't move in the wind. It doesn't decompose near as fast. You get all kinds of different types of wood products in there that decompose at different rates. So that mulch, a heavier grind mulch like that, will last twice as long as a little fine grind mulch. On a mulch like this, you can mulch right up to the trunk if you choose to. Some people still like to keep it away from the trunk. I've always mulched right up to the trunk, but I've always used that product. So that's your choice. I won't say one's better than another, but using a big heavy grind mulch like that, I've never seen crown rot or collar rot, ever, not once. Using a real fine mulch, I've seen it many times, because that situation, that fine mulch, you can pick it up and squeeze water out of it, where this mulch breathes really well and aerates really well. So the finer the grind, the more important it is to stay away from the trunk. So here's just another kind of an example of a raised, kidney bean style riverbed, rock raised bed, 5 trees in one section there. Here's 6 trees in a raised bed. Now this guy right here, very interesting guy. That's Michael Tomlinson, and he actually, Michael's an artist. He actually does a lot of work on our website, and he creates all of our material. He creates all of our handout material, all of our charts, all of our variety descriptions, our catalogs. He maintains our photo library. He's a true artist. So when Michael came to work for us, he asked if he could, this actually is the lower portion of our nursery property. The Tuolumne River runs right over here by this tree line. And this lower portion of the property, we don't grow any trees on it, because this property, when in a heavy rain and snow year, this property will be underwater for a short period of time, about this time of year. It's not right now, but it has been in the past. So we don't grow anything there, but the guys would garden down there and grow tomatoes and peppers and things like that during the summer season. And Michael came to us and said, I live in an apartment. He goes, I'd like to grow a few fruit trees down there. I know I'd have to do it in some raised beds to keep them above that water line, but do you guys have any kind of a budget where I could buy some supplies to build raised beds? And Ed and I both laughed at him and said, no, but here's the deal. You can use anything you find down there. So he went down and he found these big old walnut stumps and this big old piece of driftwood and all this rock and all these raised beds Michael has created over the years. And maybe you don't want that look in your backyard, but you know what? It's functional. It does the job. It gives you that area where the top roots can oxygenate and you can keep it above the soil line. So, you know, for function, you can use anything you want. If you don't want to use walnut stumps and riverbed rocks, you can use 2x12s. You can, you know, do anything you want to create that raised bed, but there's a function there. That has the ability to keep those soils from becoming anaerobic. So that, you know, there's a reason to do that. And as long as you're, you know, using that to your imagination, you can create that any way you want. You want to use rocks or blocks or railroad ties or just simply, you know, 2x12 redwood structure, or you want to just dump a load of mulch on the ground and plant 4 trees in it. It all works. It all gives you the same ability for oxygenation and to eliminate that anaerobic condition. And this is exactly that. This is a skip loader bucket full of mulch dropped on the ground and 4 trees planted in it. So you didn't even dig a hole. We didn't even dig a hole. We just planted right in the mulch layer and ran an irrigation line over it, and it's done just fine. And if you drive up through the San Joaquin Valley today or tomorrow and look at all the new plantings going in, all the new almond trees and all the new walnut trees and all the peaches and plums and things that they're putting in, every single one of them is on a raised row or a raised mound, every tree. Because even though they have pretty good drainage up there, they still want to get above that level. So they're never going to have a soggy, wet situation that doesn't oxygenate well. So, you know, even if you have, in my opinion, even if you have good soil, I'd be looking at raised beds or mounded planting for pretty much everything I'm putting in. Fruit throughout the season, espalier. This is something I'm passionate about, and some of your master gardener friends are too, because this project right here is at the Fair Oaks Master Gardener's Garden east of Sacramento. And we donated some trees to them years ago. They maintain this planting really well, making these are Asian pears kind of in a candelabra style. These are kind of a twisted birdcage style. They have about 40 different espaliered plants on this property, all of them just maintained beautifully. They've done a tremendous job of it. If you're ever up there, I highly recommend that you go and visit this project because it will inspire you for decades to come. Here's an example of an espaliered fig. And this was a tree. This young lady did a really nice job. 6,000 square foot lot with a 3,000 square foot house and 70 fruit trees. 70 fruit trees, including a patio and a jacuzzi and some raised planters and some walkways. And she's done almost all of these trees as espaliers. And this is actually on a north-facing wall right here. And she put this trellis system in and planted a fig tree on it. She said, well, what do you think of this? And I said, well, I don't like it. It's too dark. I mean, it's on a north wall. It only gets sun a little bit in the summertime. And other than that, it stays dark all the time. And she said, well, you know, it's in, so I'm going to just leave it alone and see what it does. And you know what she did? She proved me wrong. Because this technique of espaliering a tree, you don't have a big giant mushroom-headed fig tree. You've got a tree now where every single branch, every single leaf, every piece of fruit gets equal light exposure. So growing on that with that compact methodology, that tree did beautifully, produced a great quality fruit, even with shade most of the time. This is actually, this is one of the greatest examples of espalier that I've ever seen. And this is an example of, this is a walnut orchard up in Northern California. And the farmer that started this orchard, he was a German guy. He understood grafting. He came from the old world, and when he came into California and decided he was going to grow walnuts, the first thing he did was say, well, I'm going to plant some Northern California black walnut seedlings so that I can grow what we call NCB rootstock, and that's a very common rootstock used for walnuts in California. So he had this area on his property where there's a farm road over here and there's an irrigation ditch that runs through here. There's about 10 or 12 feet of property that runs through there. And he decided, well, I'm going to plant 5 of these trees in a row on this little narrow strip because I can't really use this for mature English walnuts in my orchard, but I can surely grow some rootstock trees in here. So these trees were planted in 1902. So right now they're what, 116 years old? This photo was probably taken about 20 years ago, or maybe 21 or 22 years ago. And the trees are still there, they're still beautiful, but when I was doing some consulting for, there's 5 trees in the row. When I was doing some consulting for Disney a few years ago, when they were building their California Adventure theme park, they wanted to incorporate fruit trees in ornamental style. So I showed them some of these espaliered photos, and this was one of the photos that I showed them. And after the presentation, the big mouse guy came up to me and he pulled out one of his business cards and he writes a number on the back of the card and he hands me the card and he says, "I want you to contact that family." And he goes, "Disney would like to buy those trees. We'd like to incorporate those into our California Adventure theme park, and we're willing to take all the risk. We'll go and dig the trees, we'll move the trees. If anything happens, we'll accept responsibility, and we'll pay them this price for it." So I looked at the number and I said, "Hey, it's worth a phone call." So I called my friend Eric the next day and I go, "Eric, the Walt Disney would like to buy your grandfather's black walnut trees. And here's what they're willing to pay you for them." And he said, "Really?" He goes, "Well, let me talk to my brother and sister and my cousins and see if we're interested in doing that." He called me back the next day and he said, "Yeah," he goes, "thanks for the offer, but we're going to keep Grandpa's trees." And I said, "Yeah, that good for you guys, But they own 3,000 acres of walnuts in the California San Joaquin Valley. Quite frankly, if they were my trees, you could see them today at Disney's California Adventure. So not always an art form. There's a function to using espalier. It's a space-saving technique. It can grow really good quality fruit in a small area. Here's an apricot tree espaliered on a chain link fence. Here's a beautiful double-grafted Santa Rosa and elephant heart, on the same rootstock. Here's a Victoria plum done in a fan form. Here's a confused apple tree that somebody just decided, well, it's going this way, it's going this way. We'll just make it go that way, So you can do whatever you want with it. You can make it grow wherever you want it to. These are some sour cherries that are at Mount Vernon. Here's some pears that are at Mount Vernon on an old barn there. So, these are old trees. They've been done this way for many, many years. You remember the 90-year-old Harry and David's pear trees that we looked at earlier. So, these are techniques where you can grow a tree for many, many, many years and grow it in a space where it's convenient for you. Here's an espaliered apple, and the nice thing about this tree is this is the rootstock, and then each one of these laterals is a different variety. So there's 6 varieties grafted onto one tree. Here's a peach fan. There's one of the pears at the Fair Oaks project again during the summer season. I'm going to go over this quickly. Does anybody have deer problem? You have a deer problem? Here's the key to deer fencing. Don't make it stable and solid. Make it something that's flimsy, something that moves. If you create a chain link fence with solid posts and solid stretched wire, and the deer can come up to it and touch it with their hooves, and it's stable, they're going to jump it. But if you look at something like this, where it's just some wire wrapped around some fence post and a couple of wire ties or Velcro strips, the deer come up and they put their hooves on that and it moves, they're not going to touch it. They're not going to jump it. They're not even going to try to get over a fence like that. So make it simple, make it flimsy, make it easy to move, and you'll have a successful deer fence. This is Dr. Joe Sable from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I've done lots of projects with Joe, and they have a big bird problem up there. So Joe keeps all of his trees, you can see they're all pruned out at about less than 10 feet tall, so he can throw a net right over that tree. So let me ask you, if you had a 20-foot Santa Rosa plum tree, are you throwing a bird net over it? No. But Joe's trees, easily maintained, easily netted. As soon as the fruit's ripe, net comes off and goes on to the next variety. Look at Happy Joe there. There's another, there's just a simple one. Here's some covering techniques these are being used all the time now in agriculture to protect against late frosts. So this happens to be up in Wilsonville, Oregon. It's at a cherry orchard up there. And they typically have late frosts, and they have to cover against late frosts.
What's that fabric material?
Tyvek, just Tyvek row crop cover. You can buy it at Home Depot or any, agricultural supply. You can buy it in rolls. You can buy it in sheets. You can buy it pretty much any size you want. So that'll protect you against that late spring frost. And this year up in the San Joaquin Valley, huge damage from the frost that they had about 2 to 3 weeks ago. Almond crop, 25% reduction because of that frost. So we talked about using fruit trees for their other attributes. So here's a couple of beautiful double flowering peaches. Here's this is 3 fig varieties that are planted and braided together. So here's a brown and a black and a green fig that are all pleached together as one. Blueberries, I'm just going to run over this. This is all on our website. So you can get the soil mixes, you can get the fertilizer recommendations. Remember I talked about how important it is to grow blueberries in a raised bed or a container. Here's one of my blueberries. I love to grow things in half barrels. There's actually 4 different blueberry varieties in that half barrel. So this is after harvest period. This is about August 1st. So blueberries are gone, plants going into the hottest part of summer. So that's when you want to prune it. You want to do all of your blueberry pruning right after harvest. Every cut that you make in the fall or the winter takes away fruit for the spring and the summer. So all of your blueberry pruning should be done right after harvest. You get that regrowth, and that's where all your fruit comes from in the spring and summer. So no pruning blueberries at all in the winter. So that's on the website. Here's one of my, talking about rodents and squirrels and things. This is Squirrel Patrol. That's Sonia and that's Sarah. And they may not look real intimidating right there. But if you're a squirrel in my backyard, Sarah's after your butt, man. I've always taught my dogs since the time they were little puppies to chase anything out of that backyard. They'll chase birds, they'll chase squirrels, they'll chase rabbits. Unfortunately, sometimes they chase skunks, but that's their backyard. So they make sure that nobody gets access except for them. So work with your animals. I got cats that love to catch gophers. I got dogs that chase squirrels. I'm letting and they love it. They have fun. It's what they do for excitement. So DaveWilson.com is our website. We have a forum section on there. We have videos on there. We have a Facebook page. So use our website. Lots of information. Probably the most comprehensive website there is right now on growing fruit trees under backyard conditions. Thank you very much for allowing me some of your time. And have fun with it. Enjoy your trees. And, backyard gardening is more than just growing a tomato or a rose or a peach. It's good. It's good for you, for our health all the way around, mentally and physically. So enjoy your garden.